On a rainy night at a cemetery on the outskirts of the capital, guards stand vigil outside a secluded hideout. Behind closed doors, an unexpected and dangerous encounter is about to unfold. Inside the dimly lit chamber, the commander of the Black Mercenaries, Mercenary King Gerald, gazes down at his hooded visitor. Recognizing Lady Hylia Delphine, he warns her that a mercenary hideout is no place for a noble lady to wander. Hylia remains composure, acknowledging their reputation for fulfilling any task no matter how perilous. But when Gerald warns that dangerous requests carry a steep price, she looks him in the eye and asks him to marry her. Stunned by her proposal, Gerald sits back in disbelief. Hylia slowly cloak revealing her bright pink hair and striking gaze as she asks him to kidnap her on her upcoming wedding day. Gerald dismisses her proposal with a laugh, telling her this is a mercenary guild, not a place to look for a groom. Yet Hylia firmly holds her ground, assuring him she knows exactly who she is speaking to. Behind his title as A's mercenary king lies a secret identity. He is Crown Prince Arpad, possessor of the imperial dragon blood, a ruthless commander destined to become a tyrant stained in blood. Knowing his terrifying reputation, she came not for a simple request, but to propose a deal to this formidable prince. Gerald fixes his intense crimson gaze on her, seeking to understand her true intentions. Gerald questions whether she truly understands his terrifying identity and location before making such an absurd request. Yet Hylia enthusiastically agrees, outlining her precise plan to sign a legally binding marriage contract at the temple immediately after he kidnaps her. Losing his patience, Gerald abruptly cuts her off and steps closer into her personal space. The atmosphere turns suffocatingly heavy as his crimson eyes flare with murderous intent, warning her that he will take her life if she keeps spouting nonsense. A sudden chill of terror runs through Hylia, fully aware that this lethal commander could end her life in an instant. Even so, she refuses to back down, clutching her dress and fiercely declaring that he will die if he refuses her proposal. Her desperate gamble is rooted in a past far beyond this world. Before being reborn into high society as Lady Hylia Delphine, she lived a completely ordinary life in South Korea under the name Yu Shin-ah. Awakening as a helpless newborn in the grand estate of the wealthy Delphine family, she was initially disoriented. Yet as time passed, she grew accustomed to her luxurious routine surrounded by attentive maids. Believing she was destined for everlasting happiness, she eventually married a nobleman who swore his devotion to her. But that sweet illusion shattered into pieces when she discovered he was secretly carrying on an affair. To make matters worse, a malicious trap was sprung against her, framing her for treason and her own husband's betrayal. At the moment of her cruel death, time turned back, returning her to the days before her tragic marriage. In her second life, Hylia hoped to alter her tragic destiny, yet deep confusion and uncertainty clouded her judgment. When her attentive fiancé noticed her sudden distress and asked if she felt unwell, she quietly brushed aside her hesitation, remaining unsure of whom to trust in this treacherous world. Her hesitation proved fatal as history cruelly repeated itself. Her husband betrayed her once again with the very same golden-haired woman, once more stealing away her happiness and leaving Hylia weeping alone on her knees as another life slipped away. Refusing to succumb to defeat, she launched into her third regression with a bold plan to flee the capital entirely. Yet every escape attempt fell apart, resulting in her capture and the tragic sacrifice of the precious allies who fought to protect her. Forced to face public execution for a third time, Hylia stood helplessly beneath the looming guillotine. As the heavy blade hovered above, she sank into deep despair, unable to comprehend why every desperate effort to survive ended on the cold scaffold. A terrifying suspicion took root. It felt as though an invisible mastermind was orchestrating her misery from the shadows, anticipating every move. As dark ravens circled the gloomy sky, a sudden glance into the crowd shattered her remaining doubts. There, cloaked among the onlookers, stood Evangeline Luce, the witch who had been her husband and destroyed her past lives. Watching her execution with cold detachment, Evangeline's presence revealed the sinister force driving Hylia's endless cycle of death. Looking closely at the cloaked woman's lips, a sudden jolt of shock hits Hylia as she recognizes the unmistakable movements of the Korean language. Evangeline tauntingly whispers goodbye to the original female lead, declaring that everything will now belong to her. As Evangeline coldly bids her to die in peace, the terrifying truth finally clicks. Evangeline isn't merely a scheming rival, she is a fellow reincarnator who possesses full knowledge of this world's original storyline. Gasping for breath, Hylia violently sits up in her opulent bed, trembling in disbelief as she realizes time has rewound once again. She has awakened in her fourth regression, granted one last chance to rewrite her fate. Seething with fury over the endless deceit of her unfaithful husband and his lover, sudden clarity cuts through Hylia's rage. She finally understands why every attempt to alter her destiny was systematically anticipated and destroyed. This world is actually the setting of a romance novel. Unlike Evangeline, who possessed a body with full knowledge of the plot, Hylia was born blindly as the story's original protagonist, making her Evangeline's primary target. Evangeline weaponized her foreknowledge to effortlessly manipulate everyone in high society, enchanting Hylia's husband and usurping the role of female lead. Hylia now sees through the spell that bewitched those around her. Having uncovered the secret behind her repeated deaths, Hylia refuses to play the victim any longer. In this fourth life, she will reclaim everything taken from her, starting by joining forces with the Empire's most dangerous royal. Evangeline had not merely seduced Hylia's unfaithful fiancé. She had systematically brought every prominent figure across the Empire to her feet, from the high priest to the master of the magic tower, ultimately securing the position of crown princess while forcing Hylia into a wretched exit in every life. Refusing to let her past hesitation cost any more lives among the loyal allies who protected her, Hylia steps away from her bed with absolute resolve. Now that she understands her repeated executions were completely fabricated from the shadows, she will no longer remain a helpless victim. Even though she was born into this world as its original protagonist without ever reading the novel, her 3 regressions have given her a powerful advantage. She possesses vital information and hidden truths that were never written in the original story. With the wedding date fast approaching and her fiancé's heart already completely stolen by Evangeline, Hylia casts aside all remaining hesitation. To rewrite her tragic fate and destroy her rival's scheme, she will start by replacing her husband with the Empire's most dangerous prince. In my past 3 lives, Grand Duke Ludwig Kielan was the man I called my husband, and the enemy who ultimately destroyed me. Driven by an insatiable ambition, he used our marriage to secure the Delphine Duchy's immense wealth, obsessively keeping bound by his side no matter what terrible atrocities he committed. Before taking my revenge on both Ludwig and Evangeline, there is a critical first step I must take to set my trap. Walking with deliberate grace through the grand palace corridor, I fling open the ornate doors to face the open courtyard. A subtle smile curves my lips before I let out a frantic, ear-splitting scream that echoes throughout the entire mansion. I cry out at the top of my lungs, ensuring every noble and servant within reach hears my fake distress. Ludwig comes bursting into the hall with wide, startled eyes, surrounded by frightened maids who rush to investigate the noise. I burst into dramatic tears, trembling helplessly as I loudly declare that I cannot possibly wear the prepared wedding dress. Gasps ripple through the room as Ludwig's composure breaks, and he shouts at me to stop talking nonsense. With our wedding taking place tomorrow, he furiously reminds me how often I once praised this dress, completely baffled and enraged by my sudden defiance. Evangeline steps forward, soothingly stroking his sleeve to restrain his temper while putting on a show of gentle concern. Smiling sweetly, she whispers that pre-wedding anxiety is entirely normal for a bride, coaxing him to act like a thoughtful and supportive groom. Watching their sickening double act fills me with absolute revulsion. Behind my weeping eyes and trembling fingers, my gaze turns sharp and icy. I see straight through their pathetic deception, and I refuse to ever walk down the aisle as his helpless victim. In my first life, I walked down the aisle without knowing a thing, only to learn after the wedding that the gown had been embroidered with Ludwig and Evangeline's initials. She mocked me to my face, boasting that I was nothing more than a prop meant to make their secret romance all the more thrilling. As the Empress's stepdaughter, Evangeline sought power by setting her sights on Ludwig, the Emperor's nephew. Watching her shamelessly link arms with him right in front of me would have broken my heart in the past, but now it only fuels my trap. Throwing myself into Ludwig's arms, I erupt into frantic tears, exclaiming that someone has engraved initials onto my gown. Ludwig tries to brush it off as standard bridal embroidery, but stammers in unease when I loudly declare that those letters belong to another woman entirely. Evangeline nervously steps in, offering a strained excuse that the dress must have been accidentally swapped. But I cut her off by reminding everyone that my family handled the fittings under her personal supervision, catching her completely off guard. holding up the silk to reveal the letters L and E stitched near the embroidery. I weep hysterically about how a simple mistake could never explain this. I bury my face in despair, claiming someone who deeply envies our marriage is behind it. Clinging tightly to Ludwig, I whisper through my tears that someone must be deliberately sabotaging our wedding. I softly add that it feels like a woman close by is trying to steal him, directing every eye in the room toward a stunned Evangeline. Evangeline turns pale and stammers in protest, while Ludwig tries to soothe me by insisting that our marriage was personally arranged by the emperor himself. But the seed of suspicion has already been planted. Ludwig tries to regain control, sternly reminding me that our marriage is backed by an imperial decree. He condescendingly tells me to be a good girl since the wedding is tomorrow and there is no time to prepare another dress. But his pathetic attempts to suppress my outburst only make me more determined to tear his plans apart. Darting barefoot across the stone floor, I scale the balcony railing and look down at the courtyard below. I cry out dramatically that I would rather throw myself off than wear a dress tainted by someone else's dirty secrets. Horror washes over Ludwig's face as he screams at me to get down immediately, completely terrified of losing his prize. Looking down at him from above, I savor his desperation. He has no choice but to yield because his dream of gaining ultimate power depends entirely on acquiring my duchy's wealth. He cannot afford to let me die today, and we both know it. Gritting his teeth in frustration, Ludwig takes a violent step forward and grabs a nearby flame. Without hesitation, he ignites the silk gown, reducing the ruined dress to ashes right in front of everyone. Evangeline and the servants recoil in sheer shock as the room fills with smoke and fire. Tossing the charred remains away, Ludwig desperately tries to repair the damage. He loudly proclaims that he does not care who committed this atrocity and will not allow anything to destroy our wedding day, extending his open palm to guide me back to safety. I place my hand in his and step down into his arms, instantly switching back to my role as the devoted, grateful bride. Softly weeping against his chest, I thank him for taking my side, before gently reminding him that without a wedding gown, our ceremony tomorrow is completely ruined. With no other option left, Ludwig suddenly turns to a stunned Evangeline and demands she surrender her own extravagant dress, the lavish gown gifted by the Empress for her birthday. Evangeline recoils in sheer horror as he ruthlessly commands her to yield the dress to her future sister-in-law, desperate to keep the wedding on schedule. Standing quietly in her private fitting room, Hylia gazes at the luxurious gown now displayed on the mannequin. She had only intended to punish Evangeline for her petty malice, never expecting to completely strip away her rival's prized dress. Gazing at the ornate embroidery, a quiet satisfaction washes over her as she realizes she should have taken control long ago. Looking closely at the gown's details, her thoughts drift back to the palace maids who stood by in silence. It is clear the servants were bribed to turn a blind eye to Ludwig and Evangeline's ongoing affair throughout the entire wedding preparation. Narrowing her eyes, Hylia's gaze turns cold and resolute. Her vengeance has only just begun. Reaching down, Hylia gently touches the imperial wedding ring. The ring was originally set with 3 radiant purple diamonds. Yet with every tragic death and regression, returning her to the eve of her wedding. Now that the final gem has gone completely dark, she knows this regression is her ultimate and final chance. Clenching her fist with unwavering determination, she vows that she will not fail this time. Annie steps into the room to check on her lady, gently caressing her swollen, tear-stained eyes with deep concern. Touching her hand, the lady offers a soft, grateful smile and thanks her for worrying. Remembering how the wet nurse's daughter sacrificed her own life again and again in past regressions just to protect her, the lady gazes at her faithful maid with quiet resolve, secretly swearing to save her this time. Leaning close, Annie urgently whispers that the initials on the wedding dress match the Marquis of Ruth's daughter, the very woman seen flirting with the Grand Duke. Thrilled that her mistress shares her deep suspicions, Annie agrees to convey a message to Sir Belton for a meeting tonight. Night settles quietly over the ducal residence as a heavy knock echoes at the office door. Sir Renus Belton steps inside, promptly answering the summons of the lady he serves. In her third life, Beltane was the single knight who never betrayed her, risking everything to aid her escape while others sided with Ludwig. Standing before her now, he apologizes for the sudden visit, insisting he must speak for her safety. With grave intensity, the loyal knight delivers a damning truth. Grand Duke Ludwig is not marrying her out of love, but solely to claim the power of House Delphine, all while maintaining an untoward relationship with the Marquis' daughter. Recalling how Sir Beltane remains steadfastly loyal across her past regressions, Hylia listens as he desperately begs her to rethink marrying Ludwig. Though he urges her to reconsider for her own safety, she gazes at him with deep gratitude, remembering how he fought for her until the very end. Knowing the wedding is set for tomorrow, Hylia softly explains that calling it off now is impossible. Reclaiming her authority as the true heir of House Delphine, she formally commands her knight to protect her tonight, quietly resolving that this time she will be the one to save him. An hour later, under the cover of night, Hylia quietly navigates the dark corridors of the ducal estate. With House Delphine's strongest knight closely watching her back, she moves forward with absolute confidence, trusting him to aid her silent escape from the mansion. Suddenly, an upset voice pierces the silence, causing Hylia to freeze. Peering over the balconies, she spots Ludwig standing with Marquis Ruth's daughter, Evangeline, who is screaming in a fury over her altered dress and demanding to know how he could betray her trust. Panicking, Ludwig begs Evangeline to quiet down before anyone hears them. He urges her to remember that marrying into House Delphine is their only way to stand against the crown prince, to which Evangeline angrily snaps that exploiting Hylia's family was the only reason she tolerated this deception. Ludwig angrily snaps at his secret lover, accusing her of making an absurd fuss over a single wedding dress. But Evangeline's temper completely boils over, and she slaps him hard across the face. Stunned by the unexpected violence, Hylia watches from the balcony as a panicked Evangeline desperately reaches out to apologize, only for Ludwig to coldly strike her hand away. Commanding Evangeline to return to the palace and stay away from tomorrow's ceremony, Ludwig angrily storms off, leaving Hylia quietly smirking at the bitter rift opening between her enemies. Recalling how obsessively devoted the two lovers were in past regressions, Hylia clenches her fist with fierce determination, swearing she will never allow them to dictate her fate again. Noticing her trembling in the cool night breeze, Sir Beltane gently draws close to steady her, only to pull back with a flustered apology when he realizes how intimately he touched her. Deeply touched by his silent devotion, Hylia gazes softly at her knight, quietly renewing her resolve to survive this fourth regression for the sake of those who truly cherish her. Refusing to meet the same tragic execution that destroyed her in a past life, she stands resolute, fully prepared to shatter Ludwig's scheme and claim her ultimate freedom. Refusing to foolishly turn her back on reality as she did in her past lives, Hylia recognizes that this fourth regression is her single remaining chance. Staking her very existence on one last high-stakes gamble, she vows to rewrite her destiny. To achieve her vengeance, she resolves to turn Crown Prince Arpad into her ally. The imperial bloodline carries the ancient power of dragon blood, but those who inherit this formidable legacy are also cursed with a severe and uncontrollable madness. With dragon blood said to rival the founding emperor, Arpad is eventually driven completely insane by its corrupting power. Unable to rely on an heir consumed by madness, the emperor secretly attempted to pass the throne to his nephew, Ludwig. To oppose his father's ascension plans, Arpad concealed his identity in the capital as the mercenary King Gerald, gathering forces whenever the crimson moon rose. But in every past regression, he was ultimately hunted down and slain by the emperor. Knowing precisely how to rescue him from his tragic fate and secure her own survival, Hylia tracks the hidden prince to his secluded library. Dropping her cowl, she stuns him with a bold declaration that he will die unless he agrees to marry her. Caught completely off guard, Arpad demands to know what she means. Gazing directly into his striking red eyes, Hylia remains unshakable, knowing that in all three of her previous lives, his unbridled madness led directly to his demise. Hylia boldly promises to save Crown Prince Arpad from his destined madness and secure his ascension to the imperial throne, warning that his life will be in grave danger if the emperor uncovers his dual identity. Arpad merely chuckles, feigning light-hearted amusement at her unexpected audacity. Just as Hylia begins to believe her high-stakes proposal might actually succeed, Arpad's casual facade instantly shatters. Crimson energy violently surges through the dark library as his glowing red eyes lock onto her with terrifying murderous intent. Caught completely off guard by the sudden shift in his aura, Hylia freezes in alarm. Before she can take a breath, Arpad lunges forward with blinding speed, forcefully pinning her against the wall and hovering over her with overwhelming force. Gazing down at her with chilling contempt, Arpad coldly declares that he despises anyone who presumes to manipulate fate. Without a moment's hesitation, he draws a razor-sharp dagger, pressing the icy blade firmly against her delicate throat. Radiating a suffocating aura of bloodlust, Arpad roars in fury, damning her arrogance for daring to dictate his future and warning that she has foolishly provoked the dragon's reverse scale. Feeling the sharp blade biting into her skin, Hylia realizes she severely miscalculated his volatile rage. Yet even with death hovering inches away, she refuses to back down. Knowing this final regression is her last hope, she forces a defiant smirk. Recalling her past executions, Hylia calmly informs him that she has no fear of death. Smirking directly at the sharp blade pressed against her throat, she warns that he will ultimately be the one to regret taking her life. Holding her ground without a hint of fear, she boldly warns that he will be the one left with bitter regret. Caught off guard by her fierce, unyielding eyes, he softly chuckles and draws back his blade, leaving only a tiny graze on her throat. He remarks that he never heard the Lady of House Delphine was so utterly insane. Though she secretly breathes a sigh of relief that he spared her life, she keeps a cool smile as he steps closer, intrigued by her fearless gamble. Pinning her wrists firmly above her head against the wall, he demands to know how she intends to keep a madman like him sane. She meets his dark gaze head-on, reminding him that handing over her secrets right now would only give him a reason to eliminate her. He coldly whispers that he could simply lock her in a dungeon and torture the answers out of her. Unfazed by his lethal threat, she looks back at him with supreme confidence, asking if he truly thought she would walk into his lair completely unprepared. She reveals that she has already set measures in motion, ensuring that if she fails to return home safely, damaging secrets will immediately be leaked to his political rivals. Knowing that taking her life would ruin him, he listens in ominous silence. Calling her a remarkably dangerous woman, he points out that giving in to her blackmail is far too risky for someone in his position. Recognizing his valid hesitation, she decides it is time to offer a sweet down payment to earn his trust. The moment she asks for a second to present her initial offering, he growls with suspicion, assuming she is trying to escape. She quickly reassures him that she is staying right where she is, leaving him to release a weary sigh of defeat. Reluctantly agreeing to test her offer, he lets go of her bruised wrist and waits for her to present her token of trust. She calmly reaches out, handing him a small, plain drawstring pouch with complete composure. Warning her that he will sever her head on the spot if this turns out to be a pathetic trick, he unlaces the leather cord. But as the fabric pulls open, his red eyes widen and he abruptly freezes in place. Gleaming in his gloved palm is the Tears of Agrippina, one of the legendary 5 blessed jewels he has spent years searching for. Holding his gaze with a fearless smile despite the cut on her neck, she promises to surrender the remaining payment once he accepts her terms. Inspecting the radiant gem, he admits it is an extraordinarily rare find, yet he remains openly skeptical. Stepping back, he dryly asks if she truly believes the crown prince could be so easily swayed by a single glittering stone. She instantly counters that this is far more than just a simple jewel, identifying it as the very relic he has been desperately hunting down. She emphasizes that she has just willingly handed over a prize of immense value as a mere gesture of good faith. As his expression darkens with curiosity, she delivers a startling revelation that catches him off guard. She asserts that neither the Tears of Agrippina nor any other sacred relic in existence can truly soothe the raging madness inside him. With unyielding conviction, she tells him that the only cure for his condition is her, prompting a sudden violent reaction. Before she can draw another breath, he lunges forward and hauls her flush against his chest, causing her to gasp in surprise. Gripping her firmly as the room tension boils over, he growls low in her ear. He whispers darkly that handing him an initial down payment that only serves to infuriate him is a dangerously reckless game to play. Leaning in close, the Crown Prince demands to know how she intends to deliver the rest of her promised payment. Undeterred by the blood on her throat, she calmly reiterates her vow to stop his descent into madness and secure his crown. But Arpad only growls a lethal warning, making it absolute that if she is luring him into a trap with empty talk, she will never leave the room alive. Refusing to back down, she reveals the name of Gerald, the king of mercenaries, keeping the full scope of her plan conditional on his acceptance. Reminding him that she has already handed over an irreplaceable relic, she places the final decision entirely in his hands. Chuckling softly at her sheer audacity, Arfad admits it is the most absurd request he has ever received, yet he grudgingly accepts her terms. Later that evening, an ominous crimson moon hangs heavy in the sky above the dark palace spires. Inside the grand corridors, the servants glance nervously out the windows, whispering fearfully to one another. They pray the crown prince stays far away on business, terrified of the unpredictable violence that follows his presence whenever the moon turns red. Their worst fears come true as heavy footsteps echo down the corridor and Arfad unexpectedly steps into view. Dressed in full imperial regalia with his crimson eyes glowing intensely in the dark, his suffocating aura freezes the servants in place. Stuttering in sheer horror, they struggle to bow while stammering out a fragile greeting. Looking back over his shoulder with a dark, menacing smirk, Arfad mockingly asks if they are terrified he will lose his mind and butcher them all on the spot. As the panicked servants quickly shrink back in terror and plead for mercy, he quietly turns away, continuing his stride past the massive stained glass windows bathed in blood-red moonlight. Arfad reflects on the dark secret he guards so fiercely. Every time the crimson moon rises, he retreats to the catacombs to suppress his raging madness, a ritual no one on the continent should ever have known. Yet Lady Delphine knew about both his hidden curse and his ties to the mercenary king. He remembers her kneeling before him with absolute composure, declaring with unyielding confidence that she could stop his descent into insanity. Standing over her, he was struck by how fearlessly she looked into the eyes of a prince everyone else treats as a lethal monster. To prove her intentions are genuine, Delphine willingly invokes a solemn divine contract. As glowing magical circles surround them, she stakes her very life on her promise, swearing to the heavens that if her claim to suppress his madness is false, her wrist shall be severed. Walking alone beneath the blood-red moon, Arfad ponders the true identity of the woman who disrupted his night. Her secrets remain shrouded in mystery, and he cannot yet be certain of her ultimate motives, but her bold oath has echoed deep within him. Whatever her game may be, Arfad reaches a firm conclusion. He will never allow Ludwig to claim her. A dark, amused smirk spreads across his lips as he recalls how audacity brought her here to blackmail him, and her parting reminder that her wedding is tomorrow. The dreaded morning of her fourth wedding finally dawns upon the grand estate. But before any vows can be exchanged, her fiancé Ludwig confronts her in the hall, harshly questioning her capability as a future Grand Duchess and scolding her for being so weak-willed. Dressed in her elegant bridal gown, Hylia remains eerily serene beneath his barrage of insults. Even as Ludwig demands to know what caused the fresh wound visible on her neck, a faint, calculating smile glances across her lips, hiding her true intentions behind a composed facade. With deliberate hesitation, she feigns distress and claims an intruder slipped into her quarters during the early hours, pressing a cold blade against her throat. Ludwig reacts with immediate disbelief, furiously insisting that security was tighter than ever, and accusing her of hurting herself during a foolish nightmare. Hylia refuses to let the matter rest, arguing that a self-inflicted wound would be impossible, and suggesting an insider must be trying to sabotage their marriage. She pointedly implies that someone who secretly loves Ludwig might be trying to stop the wedding from taking place. Leaning in close, she turns the accusation back onto him, asking where he could have possibly been last night when she called out his name repeatedly. She leaves the haunting question hanging in the air, calculated to unsettlingly provoke his conscience and break his composure. Agitated and visibly shaken by her insinuations, Lud violently snaps, grabbing her wrist with a harsh grip. Staring down at her with cold fury, he sternly warns her to distinguish between what she should and shouldn't say on the sacred day of their wedding. Losing his temper entirely, he shoves her roughly to the marble floor, shouting at her not to force her delusional accusations onto him. Hylia falls back onto the ground in her wedding dress, enduring his sudden outburst as he continues to berate her. Just as Ludwig shoves her onto the marble floor, the grand doors swing open to reveal an unexpected visitor arriving at the hall. Ludwig freezes in absolute terror, caught red-handed in a moment of cruelty on his wedding morning. Stepping into the room with radiant authority, the Emperor angrily bellows Ludwig's name, demanding to know what on earth he is doing. Caught completely off guard, Ludwig stammers in sheer panic, unable to pull himself together. Beneath her bowed head, Hylia allows a subtle, triumphant smile to touch her lips. Everything has unfolded according to her design. She deliberately pushed Ludwig over the edge, knowing full well the Emperor always makes an unannounced visit on the wedding morning. The emperor chose his nephew as a political counterweight because he distantly distrusts his own son. Seeing Ludwig act like a violent brute on his wedding day instantly shatters the monarch's faith in the man he hand-picked for Hylia. Ludwig frantically tries to laugh off the incident as a petty disagreement between lovers, desperately pleading with Hylia to confirm his story. Soft-spoken and meek, Hylia obediently agrees while quietly making sure her freshly bruised wrist remains right in the emperor's view. Gazing at the visible marks on her skin, the emperor turns on his nephew with cold disdain, appalled that he would raise a hand against his bride. Ludwig helplessly sputters in protest, but his desperate, frantic denials only make him appear more guilty. Reminding Ludwig that he personally arranged this marriage, the emperor delivers a stern, uncompromising ultimatum. If Ludwig disappoints him ever again, he will have no choice but to cast him aside and seek other political alternatives. Brushing his nephew off as pathetic, the emperor turns on his heel and exits the hall. As Ludwig trembles in silence, Hylia watches him quietly from behind, satisfied that her first calculated strike has successfully planted the seeds of his downfall. With Ludwig standing with the emperor utterly shattered, the first crucial phase of Hylia's plot is complete. Now all that remains for her is to patiently wait for Crown Prince Arpad to fulfill his promise and plunder the wedding. As her ornate wedding carriage glides through the bustling estate grounds toward the ceremony plaza, joyous crowds gather along the path, cheering wildly and showering the bride with warm blessings for a long, wonderful union. Yet sitting beneath her delicate veil, Hylia finds no comfort in their celebratory cheers. Every single blessing sounds like a bitter curse to her ears. Glancing anxiously toward the plaza clock tower as the hands tick past noon, she realizes with mounting dread that Arpad is nowhere in sight. Heavy despair weighs on her heart as she sits secluded in her gown, second-guessing her desperate gamble. She begins to fear that Arpad found her sudden proposal too absurd, mistrusted her promise to cure his madness, and ultimately chose to abandon the plan. Suddenly, a sudden noise shatters the heavy quiet inside the carriage, startling Hylia out of her reverie. Outside, the anxious driver strains to control the horses as a swift rider on a white steed gallops headlong toward the wedding procession. Cutting directly into the carriage's path, the mysterious rider pulls up alongside the vehicle with effortless control, bringing the entire procession to a sudden, breathless halt while the driver gapes in sheer, stunned astonishment. Draped in brilliant white armor and gold trim, Crown Prince Arpad sits atop his horse, his sharp red eyes fixing on the scene below. Shouts of disbelief echo through the crowd as everyone recognizes the notorious prince who has boldly arrived to claim his bride. Crown Prince Arpad dismounts directly in the middle of the busy street, his crimson eyes gleaming with lethal resolve. As the baffled procession guards whisper among themselves and try to politely redirect him to the temple ceremony, Arpad cuts them off cold with a harsh command to get out of his way. Slowly unsheathing his heavy sword with deadly grace, the prince chillingly announces that he has an urgent matter to confirm right now. He fixes the surrounding knights with a sharp, murderous glare, strictly commanding every single soldier to stay in their exact positions and never dare block his path. Trembling beneath his overwhelming aura, a terrified guard stammers and asks what he seeks to confirm, only for Arpad to demand Lady Hylia's exact whereabouts. Sensing imminent disaster, the lead guard quietly turns and whispers for a subordinate to hurry to the great temple and inform Grand Duke Ludwig immediately. However, Arpad's sharp gaze catches the subtle movement in an instant. Before the messenger knight can even take a single step to break rank, Arpad swings his blade without hesitation, striking the fleeing guard down with a brutal blow while the remaining men freeze in absolute horror. Coldly reminding the panicked knights that he explicitly warned them not to move from their spots, Arpad sternly threatens that while he spared their necks this time, he will not hesitate next. Holding his sharp blade high, he demands once more to know exactly where Lady Hylia is. With chilling precision and crimson eyes flashing, Crown Prince Arpad moves without a single shred of hesitation, severing an opponent's arm and sending him crashing down onto the stone floor in agony. He coldly warns the frozen bystanders that anyone attempting to move from their spot will face an even more fatal strike next. Standing completely unbothered amidst the violent commotion, Arpad plainly demands the whereabouts of Lady Hylia. His lethal calm sends waves of dread through the gathered court, as horrified nobles whisper amongst themselves that the Crown Prince's infamous madness has returned on the very wedding day of Grand Duke Ludwig. A slow, deliberate heel click echoes against the stone, breaking the heavy silence and drawing every gaze toward the grand carriage. Clad in an exquisite bridal gown, Hylia steps into the open courtyard, instantly capturing the undivided attention of both the stunned crowd and the crown prince. Hylia offers a graceful greeting, reminding him with composed dignity that she will soon be late for her ceremony if he detains her any further. Unmoved by her quiet plea, Arfad strides forward and reaches directly for her veil, boldly defying every established rule of noble etiquette. With a smooth, deliberate motion, he draws back the sheer fabric to uncover her breathtaking face. Hylia meets his piercing red gaze head-on, her vibrant yet calm expression showing no fear despite the astonishing audacity of his sudden action. The scandalized onlookers instantly erupt into total uproar, deeply appalled that he would dare lift the bride's veil before the sacred vows have even been exchanged. Outraged voices rise across the courtyard, fiercely condemning the crown prince for subjecting the future Grand Duchess to such a public humiliation. Without a second thought, Beltane draws his sword and steps between them, placing himself protectively before Hylia to shield her. He loudly confronts the prince for inflicting such an unbearable insult upon a noble lady. But Arfad stands entirely unfazed, staring past the gleaming blade with terrifying composure. Beltane loudly demands proper respect for his mistress, leveling his sword directly at the crown prince and sending a wave of absolute dread through the gathered court. Yet before another blade is drawn, Hylia steps gracefully past the weapon, her voice remarkably serene as she softly implores Arfad to show mercy so they may proceed to the temple. Staring into her calm eyes, Arfad instantly sees right through her fragile, demure facade. He remembers vividly how boldly she stood before him during their last secret encounter, proposing a plunder marriage with absolute conviction. Intrigued by her clever strategy, he decides to play along and fulfill his role as the ruthless groom carrying away his bride. With lightning speed, Arfad brutally slashes across Beltane's chest, causing blood to splatter across the stone floor. Despite gasping in agony from the heavy blow, the faithful knight refuses to retreat, positioning his body protectively in front of Hylia while desperately begging her to step back into safety. Watching her reaction, Arfad's dark red eyes narrow in sudden realization. The frantic terror written across Hylia's face isn't an act. She is genuinely deeply terrified for her guard's survival. Seeing her display such authentic, vulnerable concern for another man causes a cold, poisonous resentment to twist inside his chest. Approaching with a dangerous tilt of his head, Arfad coldly remarks on how devotedly her knight serves her. Hylia refuses to back down, interposing herself to protect her wounded defender and asserting that a knight's sins belong to his master, inviting him to exact whatever heavy price he wishes directly from her. A dark chuckle slips past Arfad's lips before he brutally kicks the wounded knight out of his path. Reaching out, he forcefully grips Hylia by the arm and pulls her flush against his chest, staring down into her wide eyes as he coldly reminds her that she gave her word to pay every last cost. As her faithful knight collapses to the stone floor, clutching his chest in agony, Crown Prince Arfad moves without hesitation and effortlessly sweeps Hylia up into his arms, cutting off all further resistance before the wedding ceremony can even begin. Shaken by the sudden shift in control, Hylia desperately protests against his chest while scandalized nobles whisper among themselves in sheer utter disbelief. Horrified to witness the crown prince brazenly carrying off the future Grand Duchess right before their eyes. Leaning close to her ear while the surrounding knights rush to tend to the bleeding Beltane, Arfad speaks in a cold, low whisper. He reminds Hylia that she now owes a heavy debt equal to her knight's spared life, making it unmistakably clear that he will be the one collecting every last cost. Mounted firmly atop his steed with Hylia held fast in his grip, Arfad addresses the frozen courtyard with dark satisfaction. He mockingly thanks the guards for their cooperation, declaring that Hylia is far too precious a woman to ever belong to a man like Ludwig. With absolute arrogance, Arfad announces that he will settle the insult of lifting the bride's veil by becoming her groom himself. He coldly instructs the guards to inform Ludwig that there is no longer any reason to wait at the temple, advising him to turn back and return home empty-handed. Panic flares across Hylia's face as she cries out in desperation, pleading for the crowned prince to release her while shouting Ludwig's name into the air. Unmoved by her cries, Arfad spurs his horse forward into a rapid gallop, leaving Ludwig's guards shouting helplessly in total defeat. Throughout the empire, The practice of predatory marriage dates back 300 years to the founding myth, when a rampaging dragon snatched a beautiful princess from her wedding procession. Inheriting that fierce dragon blood, Crown Prince Arfad reenacts the ancient legend, claiming his bride and plunging the court into complete chaos. Inside the temple, horror ripples through the waiting crowd as unbelievable news reaches the altar. Enraged beyond belief, Grand Duke Ludwig storms down the aisle, unable to comprehend that his bride was snatched away under the pretense of a predatory marriage right before their ceremony. Whispers flood the sanctuary as guests exchange stunned glances. They murmur in disbelief, wondering who could possess such reckless audacity to disrupt a sacred union matched by the emperor himself. Furious that an entire escort failed to protect his bride, Ludwig turns his rage on the surrounding guards. Before he can lose control completely, his sister steps in, holding him tight and urging him to regain his composure in front of the watching court. Trembling on the floor, the defeated guard begs for mercy, explaining that no force could have stopped the culprit. When he reveals that Crown Prince Arfad himself carried away Lady Hylia, Ludwig freezes in absolute disbelief, his calculated world shattering in an instant. Stunned by news that the Crown Prince himself abducted Princess Delphine right off the wedding altar, Grand Duke Ludwig marches directly to the palace. Fueled by humiliation, he demands an immediate audience with the emperor to answer for this insult. The palace guards firmly bar his entrance, explaining that His Majesty is in an urgent closed-door meeting and cannot be disturbed. Watching the heavy doors remain shut, Ludwig's frustration boils over as he suspects the court is scheming to protect themselves while completely ignoring his ruin. Refusing to be silenced, Ludwig shouts at the top of his lungs for justice, insisting that the entire capital is talking about the ruined ceremony. He wrestles against the guards' spears, desperate to make the emperor face his grievances. Inside the quiet reception room, Empress Isabel sits across from the emperor over tea, undisturbed by the loud commotion echoing outside the doors. She calmly breaks the silence, asking how he intends to handle the scandal tearing through the empire. The emperor admits that with both Arfad and Delphine still missing, public sentiment already views Ludwig's wedding as a complete disaster. Seizing the moment, Isabel feigns deep concern, questioning if Arfad has fully succumbed to madness after committing such a barbaric act. She references the old scar on her body, recalling the terrifying day 10-year-old Arfad first showed signs of insanity and left her right arm permanently damaged. She subtly suggests the crown prince has inherited the dark affliction of his birth mother. Overwhelmed with anger, the emperor slams his fist onto the table, commanding her never to bring up the late Empress Roxelane. He sternly warns that in a moment of such crisis, every word spoken within these walls must be carefully guarded. Empress Isabel quickly offers her apologies for bringing up the past, but the emperor remains deeply shaken. Gazing back on memories of the late Empress Roxelane holding their child, he sees her dark affliction reflected far too clearly in Arfad, conviction hardening that the prince's madness cannot be hidden. Meanwhile, far beyond the palace walls, Arfad and Delphine push forward on horseback, riding continuously through day and night for 3 straight days. Emerging from the dense forest foliage, the duo finally reaches the outer boundaries of the capital. Delphine reflects on her decision to orchestrate this escape. Though bride abduction is inherently violent, she deliberately requested it, not only to bind herself to the crown prince, but because of the deep symbolic power it holds. In imperial history, bride abduction mirrors the legendary founding myth of the First Empire. Utilizing such a grand spectacle reminds the realm of ancient majesty while powerfully reinforcing Arfad's standing as the legitimate crown prince. Ironically, Delphine learned this strategy from Ludwig himself. Before her regression, Ludwig framed her and staged a fake abduction to wed Evangeline, leveraging the founding myth to secure his own authority following Arfad's untimely death. Now Delphine takes satisfaction in turning Ludwig's prized scheme against him. She grins softly as she imagines how utterly humiliated he must be right now, secretly wishing she could see his ruined expression herself. Turning to outline their next move, Delphine suddenly catches sight of Arfad's unusually harsh, silent glare. Caught off guard by his somber mood, she hesitantly asks if the grueling journey has worn him out, but he curtly dismisses her concern, leaving her wondering what has drawn his ire. Hoping for a much-needed reprieve after finally leaving the capital far behind, Delphine hesitantly suggests that they can finally slow their grueling pace. But Arfad instantly tightens his firm grip of means and curtly refuses, sternly warning her that imperial pursuers could catch up at any moment as he pulls her securely against him on the speeding horse. They soon arrive at a quiet imperial villa nestled safely on the outskirts of the capital. Stepping into the private sanctuary, Delphin breathes a heavy sigh of relief and excitedly rambles about desperately needing to wash up after spending 3 filthy days continuously on horseback. But when Arfad dryly teases that his new bride is being rather proactive, she stammers in flustered embarrassment. Glancing up at him, Delphine grows even more exasperated, seeing Arfad somehow looking effortlessly immaculate and composed despite their harsh trek. Completely drained of all physical strength, she helplessly slumps over in frustration, admitting to him that she barely has enough energy left to endure his playful teasing. Before their exchange can continue any further, a high priest affiliated with the main temple steps forward to respectfully greet the crown prince. Returning the greeting, Arfad steps up with calm authority and formally requests the priest to officiate an immediate marriage ceremony between Princess Helia Delphine and himself, serving as their official sacred witness. Delphine gasps in quiet astonishment as those exact words echo through the villa room. Recalling how fiercely enraged Arfad had looked when she first proposed the staged abduction, she had firmly believed he had barely listened to her plan, never suspecting he had taken in every single detail and was fully ready to bring her vision to life. Looking upon the prince, Delphine marvels at how meticulously he has handled everything. Though he presents a fierce and unpredictable exterior to the world, Arfad has quietly honored every single detail of her proposal, ensuring her plan moves forward without a flaw. The high priest voices his deep concern, warning that a wedding abduction will inevitably wrap the princess in severe scandal. But Arfad sharply counters that after 3 days on the run, returning her now would destroy her reputation regardless. He insists that marrying him is the only way to preserve her honor, pressing the priest by recalling the solemn oath he swore to repay his debt to the late empress. As the priest falls silent under the weight of his past vow, Delphine steps resolutely to Arfad's side. She directly asks the priest to respect her choice, explaining that she has spent the last 3 days carefully weighing this decision. Swayed by her unwavering conviction, the high priest sighs and gives his consent. Stepping into the serene sanctuary with empty wooden pews and no audience present, Arfad and Delphine approach the altar together. Before the exalted stone statues of the chief god and mother goddess, they prepare to formalize their secret union. They write their names upon the official certificate and receive the sacred oil upon their heads, accompanied by holy blessings. With the ancient ritual complete, the high priest formally declares them reborn as a lawfully wedded couple under the eyes of the gods. Delphine quietly rejoices, knowing she has overcome her greatest obstacle. Because temple law reigns supreme, beyond even the authority of the emperor, their marriage is absolute. But her triumphant thoughts are suddenly cut short when the high priest dryly instructs the newlyweds to seal their sacred vows with a kiss. Caught completely off guard by the high priest's sudden call to seal their sacred vows with a kiss, Delphine glances up at Arfad in flustered hesitation. Sharing such intimacy with someone she barely knows was inevitable, yet her heart races as Arfad quietly turns his intense gaze toward her. Standing at the sacred altar alongside a man she met only days ago, Helia reminds herself that this sudden marriage is purely a strategic move. Yet as Arfad turns to face her, his intense crimson gaze fixes upon her lips with silent demand, leaving her heart pounding in sudden anticipation. Arfad reaches out and gently lifts her chin, his gloved fingers brushing her skin with deliberate slowness. She desperately tries to stay calm, telling herself that enduring this kiss is a small price to pay for securing the crown prince's overwhelming power on her side. The moment his lips press against hers, a wave of heat crashes through her, completely shattering her resolve. Though she tries to convince herself it is merely a formal wedding vow, her senses turn razor-sharp, leaving her trembling uncontrollably beneath his unexpectedly deep embrace. Golden light seems to envelop them as the kiss deepens, filling her with a strange, intoxicating warmth. Having exchanged solemn vows in her past lives with Ludwig, Helia instantly recognizes how vastly different this feels. Arfad's touch holds a fiercely possessive intensity that leaves her completely breathless. As the kiss continues without any sign of stopping, Helia feels utterly consumed by his overwhelming presence. Blushing deeply and fighting for control, she finally managed to break away, gasping for air while stammering out that they have surely done enough to complete the ceremony. Nearby, the officiating priest clears his throat awkwardly. Averting his eyes from the couple's intense exchange, Hylia quickly seizes the opportunity to step back, trying to smooth down her ruffled dignity while her face burns with residual embarrassment. But before she can collect her scattered thoughts, Arfad looms over her once more, his sharp red eyes searching her expression with intense curiosity. Looking straight into her startled purple eyes, he softly whispers a question that strikes directly at her secrets. Just who is she really? Hylia stammers in startled confusion as Arfad's intense gaze shifts in an instant, his sharp crimson eyes searching her trembling face with silent wonder. Having spent his entire life battling violent, chaotic instincts, the Crown Prince finds himself profoundly unnerved by the unexpected stillness taking root inside him. Though accustomed to maintaining ruthless self-control through endless bouts of madness, the moment their lips touched, Arfad lost all reason. The tempestuous beast inside him suddenly fell completely quiet for the first time in his life, leaving him staring down at her in utter bewilderment as he wonders who she truly is. Far away in the Eastrid Imperial Palace, news of the Crown Prince's shocking bride abduction spreads like wildfire through the imperial courts. Driven by intense curiosity, the young princess rushes into her mother's lavish quarters, eager to hear what disciplinary actions His Majesty will take against the scandalous couple. Upon learning that the Emperor has simply instructed everyone to wait without deciding on a punishment, the young noble fumes in visible frustration. He insists that stealing a bride right before her wedding is an undeniable crime, bitterly suspecting that His Majesty is blatantly taking his own son's side once again. Silencing his reckless complaints, the senior noblewoman sternly warns him that only the Emperor can truly handle Arfad. Yet as she contemplates the Crown Prince's baffling choice of an unexpected bride, she realizes this bizarre pairing offers their faction the perfect opportunity to manipulate public opinion and spread malicious court rumors. Hiding a sinister smile behind her fan, the cunning matriarch prepares to craft a dangerous narrative for the Empire. She plans to frame the entire abduction as nothing more than a reckless mishap caused by Arfad's incurable madness, convincing the realm that he is an unhinged beast who could go berserk at any moment. To secure their faction's leverage, the cunning matriarch resolves to manipulate public sentiment, aggressively pushing for Grand Duke Ludwig to marry Lady Delphine. By generating overwhelming social pressure, she intends to create a political trap that even His Imperial Majesty will be unable to ignore. Far removed from the court intrigue, Hylia sinks into a soothing warm bath, letting the day's agonizing tension slowly melt away. As she reflects on her understated wedding ceremony, she marvels at how vastly it differs from the grand jewel-encrusted celebrations of her previous lives. Back then, her lavish weddings with Ludwig were celebrated by the entire realm, yet brought nothing but betrayal and death. But having orchestrated this plunder marriage of her own free will, Hylia splashes in triumphant delight, overjoyed to have finally taken her first step toward escaping her former husband. With the marriage documents officially signed, she prepares herself to handle the political fallout waiting in the imperial capital. Yet her spirits quickly dampen as her thoughts turn to Sir Beltane, who was left behind wounded while believing his lady was forcibly abducted. Knowing Beltane's extreme loyalty, Hylia panics, fearing he might draw his blade and offer his own life out of failure. Her heart breaks further as she pictures her sweet maid Annie, who is undoubtedly frantic with worry over her mistress's sudden disappearance. Burying her face in her hands with mounting distress, Hylia rationally reminds herself that keeping her allies in the dark was an absolute necessity, as the unbelievable truth would have sounded like madness. She can only pray they endure the agonizing wait until she can safely explain her plan. Outside her thoughts, gentle candlelight flickers within the quiet room, casting soft warmth across the threshold as night settles over her newly forged alliance. As the attentive palace maids bow deeply and bid her a peaceful evening, Hylia steps into the lavishly decorated bedchamber. Looking around at the ornate furnishings and soft candlelight, she finds herself completely overwhelmed by the elaborate romantic setup prepared for her wedding night. She reminds herself that the servants in the detached palace have no idea their sudden marriage is purely a strategic survival alliance. Exhausted from the day's high-stakes political games, Hylia pulls back the delicate bed curtains and crawls onto the mattress, desperate to finally get some rest. Just as she settles onto the pillows, the soft sound of a footstep echoes across the quiet room. Hylia instantly freezes, her eyes widening in startlement as she turns toward the unexpected intruder. To her complete astonishment, Crown Prince Arfad looms in the doorway wearing an unfastened robe, teasingly remarking that his new bride is quite bold. Flustered and blushing bright red, Hylia stammers in confusion, demanding to know what on earth he is doing inside her private bedchamber. Trying desperately to smooth over the awkwardness, Hylia explains that if he is concerned about court gossip, she has already commanded all the servants to keep their distance for the night. But Arfad only glides closer, his piercing red gaze locking onto her flushed face as he softly asks if a husband really needs a specific reason to visit his wife. Closing the remaining distance in a heartbeat, Arfad wraps his arm firmly around her waist and draws her slender body close against his chest. Looking down into her trembling eyes with intense possessiveness, he murmurs that tonight is, after all, their very first night together as husband and wife. Arfad pulls Hylia close into a warm, dramatic embrace, his voice dropping low as he softly reminds her that tonight marks their very first night together as husband and wife. Utterly startled by his sudden intimacy, Hylia stammers in protest, asking what on earth he is talking about. As she attempts to pull back, her feet slip across the polished floor, sending her tumbling backward onto the bed. Standing over her with a calm demeanor, Arfad teasingly notes that she seems far more calculating than expected, leading him straight toward the bedroom. He hovers directly above her on the mattress, playfully mocking what he calls a clumsy attempt at seduction. Staring back up at him in sheer disbelief, Hylia feels her mind racing, overwhelmed by the breathless intensity of their sudden physical proximity. His hand slides gently over hers as he calls out her name, whispering softly about what a newly married couple naturally does on their first evening. Panicked eyes locked onto his, she senses the rising danger, realizing that if she does not stop him now, things will escalate completely. Desperate to halt his advance, Hylia smacks her palm right onto his forehead, shoving his head back with all her strength. She loudly insists that their hasty verbal agreement created a terrible misunderstanding, proudly declaring that they must draft a written contract to establish proper boundaries. Moving over to a small table inside the chamber, Hylia finishes writing out her terms and asks if he has any complaints. Arfad sits comfortably with his robe loose across his chest, casually reviewing the paper before pointing out one particular condition that puzzles him. The agreement details rules for joint living, strict marital fidelity, and an immediate divorce clause upon request. Arfad wonders why she would want a divorce after he becomes emperor and makes her empress. But Hylia confidentially explains that this condition serves as the ultimate proof of her honest, unselfish motives. Hylia insists that the divorce clause is intended solely to prove she isn't seeking power or the empress's crown. Arfad leans in close, quietly asking why she feels compelled to prove such a thing to him. Caught completely off guard by his question, Hylia stammers, wondering why he would object to a condition that seems entirely to his benefit. Her mind wanders back to a previous life, where she was once close to the emperor, Walter Astrid, who ultimately killed Arfad. Tormented by overwhelming guilt over slaying his own son, the devastated emperor had secluded himself in a remote temple, often weeping and voicing his painful regrets in her presence. Remembering those old rumors about Arfad having a lover, Hylia drafted the clause to prepare for the day he finds someone he truly loves. But as Arfad sits gazing silently at her across the table, she nervously wonders if he has somehow misconstrued her thoughtful intentions. Leaning closer over the soft candlelit table, Arfad bluntly asks if the divorce clause is just her personal insurance policy to walk away whenever she wants. Flustered and hurt by his cynical accusation, Hylia turns away, telling him not to come thanking her later when the time comes. Fixing his intense red gaze upon her, Arfad softly asks what she will do if he ends up dissatisfied with the divorce clause rather than grateful. Hylia frantically waves her hand in refusal, stubbornly insisting there is absolutely no way he could ever feel that way. With a sharp, playful glint in his eye, Arfad proposes a new condition. If he dislikes the free divorce clause later, they will delete it. But if he is truly pleased, he will bestow a luxurious detached palace upon her as alimony. Ecstatic at the prospect of gaining such a massive windfall of private assets, Hylia excitedly accepts the deal on the spot, completely overjoyed by her fortune. Lying alone in the quiet darkness of the bedchamber, Arfad stares up at the ceiling, unable to shake off thoughts of his enigmatic new bride. Hylia had approached him so boldly with her request for a plunder marriage, showing an astonishing lack of hesitation. Yet, the moment he playfully teased her in the bedroom, she turned completely flustered, leaving him utterly baffled by her contradictions. Reflecting on her background as a lady of House Delphine, he finds nothing in her ordinary upbringing to account for her unusual bravery. When he held a sharp blade directly to her neck on the day of their meeting, she did not even bat an eye while others would have trembled. Even during their grueling 3-day forced march, she held on to her senses until reaching the detached palace. Though she whined about the exhausting trip like any noble lady with feeble stamina, her calculating mind remains impossible to read. Arfad recalls that the only moment her mask slipped was when she interacted with that knight back at her family estate, making him suspect the soldier was her one true vulnerability. Staring into the dark, Arfad knows he ought to rejoice at finding her secret weakness to exploit for his own advantage. Yet, as they lie in the quiet chamber, an unaccountable irritation gnaws at him, unable to comprehend why the thought of her attachment to another man bothers him so deeply. 3 days later, rain pours relentlessly over the sprawling Winton ducal residence. Deep within the dark, unforgiving dungeon beneath the manor, violent shouts shatter the gloom as harsh guards brutally beat a prisoner suspended in heavy iron chains, aggressively demanding that he lift his head to face them. Despite his severe injuries, heavy chains, and bloodied brow, the imprisoned young knight slowly raises his face into the pale light, his dark eyes burning with quiet, unyielding defiance against his captors. Fuming with intense rage over losing his bride, Ludwig violently strikes the bloodied knight suspended in heavy iron chains, blaming him entirely for his humiliating defeat. Before he can inflict further punishment, an elegantly dressed noblewoman abruptly enters the dungeon chamber, shouting out his name to halt the brutal spectacle. She delivers startling news, revealing that Crown Prince Arfad is currently escorting Hylia straight toward the imperial capital. Holding out precise intelligence gathered by her mother's secret informants, she watches calmly as a stunned Ludwig eagerly snatches the route map to track their every move. Seeing how effortlessly he takes the bait, she smirks as Ludwig calculates the exact distance needed to intercept the prince. Yet looking down at him, she privately scoffs at his pathetic nature, wondering if her relentless tampering with the original plot has triggered an unpredictable butterfly effect. Tightening her grip, she recalls the powerful elite knights granted to her by her mother and commands Ludwig to move swiftly to capture Hylia. Regardless of how the timeline changes, she remains resolute, determined to use him as her pawn until absolute victory rests in her hands. Across the sun-drenched Artanua plains, Ludwig leads a squad of imperial knights at a relentless pace. Driven by desperate urgency, he pushes his horse to the limit, convinced that the outer temple is within reach and determined to reclaim his stolen bride before she is lost to him forever. Backed by the Empress herself, who granted him command of her elite forces, Ludwig revels in an overwhelming surge of ambition. For a nobleman from a minor branch family, leading such a prestigious unit makes him feel as though he has already usurped the title of crown prince. Since childhood, Ludwig harbored a deep inferiority complex toward his older cousin, Arpad. From line of succession to intellect and martial skill, Arpad's perfection constantly shattered Ludwig's fragile pride, leaving behind years of quiet humiliation and resentment. Now, with the sudden loss of his bride serving as the ultimate justification, Ludwig's long-suppressed jealousy erupts into outright murderous intent. He charges forward across the plains, eager to use this conflict to finally eliminate the rival he could never surpass. Spotting an extravagant royal carriage moving across the open terrain, Ludwig immediately brings his squad to a halt. Recognizing the opulent vehicle, he narrows his eyes in conviction, shouting orders to his knights to intercept and surround the carriage at once. Convinced that Arpad's brazen travel without concealment is a fatal display of arrogance, Ludwig closes in for the kill. As he rides directly alongside the moving door, he reaches out his hand, ready to strike down his hated cousin and claim the crown. Ludwig flinging open the lavish carriage door with a dark, confident smile, shouting out for Hylia as if victory were already within his grasp. Yet his triumphant expression instantly shatters into utter shock when he gazes inside, only to discover that the opulent interior is completely empty. Meanwhile, far across the capital at the Empress's palace, a quiet tea gathering conceals mounting anxiety. Sitting quietly across from her royal mother, the calculating blonde possessor feels a cold wave of unease wash over her, realizing that current events are spiraling entirely away from the novel's original narrative. In the original story, Crown Prince Arpad was destined to perish early, overcome by his tragic madness, while Hylia was meant to die after handing the entire Delphine duchy over to Ludwig. Seeing the two of them now form an unthinkable alliance through a plunder marriage fills her with sudden dread. Steeling her resolve, she reminds herself of her distinct advantage as a transmigrator who holds the power to alter fate. If Ludwig fails to secure the Delphine inheritance as planned, every grand ambition she carefully constructed to gain supreme wealth and standing through him will collapse into complete ruin. Beyond the threat to her ambition, another persistent thought continues to disturb her peace. She simply cannot erase Arpad from her mind. Back when she casually read the original book in her past life, she found the tearful female lead and uninspiring male lead thoroughly frustrating and uninteresting to read about. In her previous life, she had paid little attention to Arpad, who barely had any presence in the written story. But after transmigrating into this world, seeing the real Arpad in person left her utterly mesmerized, completely unprepared for just how strikingly captivating he truly was in reality. Recognizing that no amount of knowledge could save him from his hopeless insanity, she had forced herself to abandon all hope of claiming him. Yet as she tightly grips her gown in simmering resentment, she cannot stomach the bitter realization that Arpad is now becoming another woman's devoted husband. Noticing her daughter anxiously biting her lip in silent distress, the Empress gently chides Eva to stop ruining her pretty lips. Struggling to suppress her deep panic over the altered timeline, Eva nervously asks if their situation will truly be resolved, but her mother remains entirely unbothered by her daughter's unease. The Empress smoothly reassures her that Arpad's sudden plunder marriage actually grants them ideal justification to strike back. Thanks to the malicious rumors they carefully planted throughout the capital, public reputation has plummeted to rock bottom, ensuring neither the imperial court nor the emperor will ever accept the pair as a legitimate couple. Reassuring Eva that she is destined to reign supreme as the true empress of the empire, her mother vows to secure her elevated position above all rivals. Eva Bess offers a radiant, dutiful smile in response, softly expressing her gratitude while playing the role of a precious, devoted daughter with flawless grace. Beneath her sweet facade, the transmigrator secretly scoffs in dark contempt, amazed that the Empress cannot even tell her real daughter's soul was replaced. But their calculating quiet is suddenly shattered when a panicked servant bursts through the doors, announcing that Crown Prince Arpad and Lady Delphine have officially entered the palace grounds. Down in the expansive palace courtyard, Arpad rides in without the slightest attempt at concealment, carrying Hylia right in front of him on his white horse. Stunned onlookers and imperial guards gather in shock, whispering frantically about the infamous wedding abduction and murmuring that the crown prince has succumbed to his tragic madness. Overhearing the bitter rumors echoing across the courtyard, Hylia sits firmly against Arpad's chest as his strong arm holds her securely in the saddle. Though fully aware of the public scandal, she glances up in quiet realization, understanding that he never intended to hide and fully means to enter through the main gates. Directly ahead stands the magnificent Gate of Glory, the grandest entrance to the imperial palace opened exclusively for official royal processions or celebrated national heroes. To show up unannounced after a scandalous abduction and demand that this sacred portal be thrown open for them is an act of utterly reckless brilliance. As the horse brings them to a halt before the entrance, the flustered palace guard stammers in utter shock, recognizing Crown Prince Arpad standing right at the threshold. Looking down from high upon his steed, Arpad coolly orders him to skip the useless pleasantries and open the Gate of Glory immediately. The panicked guard stammers, nervously demanding to know where the Crown Prince has been all this time and who he is carrying beside him. In response, Arpad merely tightens his strong grip around Hylia's waist, bringing her closer against his chest without offering a single word of explanation. With dark authority glittering in his eyes, Arpad warns the guards not to make him repeat himself. Holding Hylia securely before the entire imperial court, he boldly demands how much longer they dare to obstruct the official procession of the crown prince and his new consort. Riding together through the imperial courtyard, Hylia admits she is more than satisfied with their dramatic spectacle. When she wonders how long they will remain on horseback, Arfad teasingly replies that he intends to showcase his new bride everywhere, just as she requested. Her quiet satisfaction shatters when her gaze falls upon a woman standing near the palace pillars, Evangeline. Flashbacks of past lives immediately resurface, bringing back dark memories of the woman who stole everything from her and mocked her before her death. Unease tightens in Hilia's chest as she wonders why her enemy has appeared here. She steels her resolve, determined that in this fourth life she will finally break free from Evangeline's grasp. Sensing her sudden distress, Arfad gently holds her closer and softly calls her name. He leans in close, checking her pale forehead for a fever, troubled by how visibly her body is trembling in his arms. Determined not to reveal any vulnerability after coming so far, Hilia tries to reassure him that she is fine. Yet Arfad sees right through her front, firmly insisting that she clearly looks far from all right. Before she can utter another word of protest, Arfad takes matters into his own hands and lifts her directly off the horse into his arms. Shocked by his sudden action, Hilia gasps as he holds her tightly against him. Sweeping Hilia directly off the horse into his arms, Arfad loudly announces to the imperial courtyard that his new bride is far too frail to ride any longer. Shocked and flustered by his public display, Hilia leans against him, wondering why he is making such an embarrassing declaration out of nowhere. Stealing a cautious glance back over his shoulder, Hilia catches sight of Evangeline standing nearby in utter shock. Realizing Arfad staged this grand protective spectacle on purpose, after noticing her distress, the steady warmth of his secure embrace finally lulls her shaking heart into a deep calm. Across the courtyard, Evangeline recoils in stunned outrage as she watches the crown prince gently carry Hilia toward the palace entrance. She can hardly process the humiliating sight, convinced that Hilia mocked her while her mother steps up beside her to assess the unexpected turn of events. Her mother complains bitterly that Ludwig was far too useless to reclaim his bride, insisting they must now bide their time until they find a vulnerability to ruin Hilia. But mid-sentence, she halts in surprise, noticing Evangeline slumping forward and trembling with uncontained emotional turmoil. Sternly admonishing her daughter for holding on to foolish attachment, her mother reminds her that Arfad is far too strong to ever be manipulated like Ludwig. She forcefully commands Evangeline to cast aside her petty feelings and focus entirely on the grander tasks waiting ahead of them. Though Evangeline meekly promises her mother that those feelings were just a passing breeze of youth, bitter jealousy burns within her. Tightly clutching her dress ribbon, she refuses to accept that an untouchable man like Arfad, whom no woman was ever meant to possess, has chosen Hilia. The image of Hilia winning the crown prince's devotion fills Evangeline with intense resentment and growing panic. As she stares into the shadows, a dark dread takes hold of her mind, realizing that the original plot is twisting into something far more dangerous and unpredictable. Driven by growing terror that she might be the one facing a catastrophic ending as the original story twists, Evangeline resolves to temporarily set aside her initial plans. Staring ahead with fierce resentment, she swears she will no longer sit back and watch Hilia claim victory. Meanwhile, inside the Grand Imperial Palace, the Emperor awaits inside the solemn audience chamber. Entering together in matching elegance, Crown Prince Arfad and Hilia walk side by side down the sweeping red carpet to present themselves before the throne. Hilia bows gracefully, offering a formal greeting to His Imperial Majesty as Arfad's wife. But the Emperor's expression turns dark as he reminds her that she was arranged to marry his nephew, slamming his fist in fury at their blatant disregard for imperial authority. Hilia remains completely unbothered, calmly assuring the sovereign that neither she nor the crown prince intended to undermine his throne. Looking closely at her, the emperor asks if Arfad took her by force, promising to annul the union and return her home if she wishes. Without a hint of hesitation, Hilia firmly refuses his offer to undo the marriage. She then drops a massive bombshell on the emperor, revealing that her union with Arfad has already been consummated and legally notarized by the temple, leaving him in stunned disbelief. Placing a hand over her heart, Hilia warmly lies that love alone drove their sudden actions. She audaciously compares Arfad's plunder marriage to the legendary tale of the empire's founder who stole his own bride, leaving the emperor utterly flabbergasted by her audacious defense. She gracefully concludes that their theatrical spectacle was merely an homage to imperial history, defining it as their official position. Standing shoulder to shoulder beside her, Arfed firmly confirms her words, presenting an unbreakable, united front. When the emperor slyly questions if their official position is merely a cover for reality, Hylia remains completely unbothered. She turns the tables on the sovereign, boldly asking His Imperial Majesty whether he truly believes Ludwig is fit to become the empire's next ruler, causing the monarch to defensively snap back from his high throne. Hylia points out that by arranging her marriage to Ludwig and granting him the Delphine Duchy, the emperor effectively elevated a dangerous rival against Crown Prince Arfad. Taking a firm step forward across the red carpet, she gazes directly at the sovereign and pointedly asks how much he actually knows about his nephew. Gravely offended, the emperor scowls and asks if she is daring to suggest he lacks an eye for assessing character. Hylia calmly concedes that while she cannot judge other matters, her first-hand knowledge of Ludwig is absolute, declaring with unflinching resolve that he is by no means fit to ever wear the crown. Standing before the majestic imperial throne, she delivers a fearless declaration, asserting that Ludwig is completely unfit to ever be considered for succession. When the emperor gazes down and demands to hear her reasoning, she stands her ground, prepared to expose the dark reality she witnessed during her years by his side. She lays bare the severe flaws in Ludwig's character, explaining how his narrow-minded nature prevents him from ever protecting others. Driven by a bitter inferiority complex toward the crown prince, his ruthless ambition far outstrips his actual abilities, making him a dangerously unstable man who can never achieve true greatness. To provide undeniable proof of his misdeeds, she brings up a past corruption scandal within the former duchy, where a steward embezzled vital public funds and neglected critical farmland reservoirs. Rather than punishing the culprit, Ludwig astonishingly chose to reinstate the dishonest steward to his position just 1 year later. She exposes the calculated motive behind the reinstatement. A noble candidate had opposed raising land taxes during a severe harvest failure, whereas the disgraced steward was easily blackmailed into doing Ludwig's bidding. She argues that if he managed a small duchy with such shameless deceit, he would surely ruin the entire empire. Standing tall under the warm light of the throne room, she firmly asks the monarch to imagine the grim future under such leadership. The emperor thoughtfully taps his fingers against the armrest of his throne, quietly acknowledging that her point is entirely correct and her critique of Ludwig is well-founded. Yet her heart shatters when the sovereign coldly announces that despite her flawless logic, his judgment will not change. Driven by utter disbelief, she confronts the ruler directly, questioning how anyone who sacrifices public justice for private greed could ever be deemed fit to wear the imperial crown. When the sovereign reveals that his decision stems entirely from fears over the crown prince's deadly madness, she remains completely unfazed by his harsh words. Gazing up at the imperial throne while standing steadfast beside Arpad, she calmly reassures the monarch that his greatest concern no longer exists. She boldly declares that Arpad's madness was completely cured from the very moment they met. To back her unbelievable claim, she recounts a divine dream from the eve of their wedding, where the great founding dragon, Lord Artanis, personally bestowed a blessing ensuring the crown prince would never suffer madness while by her side. Unmoved by her extraordinary tale, the sovereign gazes down with deep skepticism and openly questions her honesty. Resting his gloved hand on his chin, he directly challenges her to swear to the truth of this dragon's blessing before a holy priest, or in the presence of a sacred imperial relic. Though the divine dream is actually a clever fabrication designed to persuade the monarch, her public resolve remains entirely unshakable. She firmly informs the ruler that neither priests nor sacred relics are required for proof, as Lord Artanis himself promised to deliver undeniable evidence directly to the imperial court. Intrigued by her unexpected proposal, the emperor sternly inquires what manner of evidence she could possibly be talking about. Standing tall under the warm light of the throne room, she humbly asks for a single imperial favor: permission to hold their grand wedding banquet inside Artanis Hall in exactly 1 month and 7 days. The emperor incredulously asks if she even comprehends the sacred significance of the venue she is demanding. She knows full well that Artanis Hall, named after the progenitor dragon, is the empire's grandest sanctuary where royal coronations take place, making a wedding banquet there an absurd notion. Yet a subtle smile touches her lips. She insists that holding their banquet inside Artanis Hall carries essential symbolism, serving as indisputable proof that their marriage has received the emperor's official approval. Surprising her, the monarch quietly commands her to step closer to the throne, causing her to hesitate briefly as she walks forward, wondering what he intends to do. In an instant, a flash of light forms a transparent barrier around the imperial throne, completely isolating their conversation from outside ears. With their words hidden from the court, the sovereign gazes down intently and asks if she is secretly being threatened or manipulated by someone else. She firmly insists she harbors no ulterior motives and is merely following the dragon's will, though the emperor scoffs with heavy skepticism. Yet as he rests his hand against his face in deep distress, his conflicted demeanor betrays a father terrified of ruining the empire, rather than a man who harbors hatred toward Arpad. Remembering the profound remorse the monarch harbored in her previous life, she takes a courageous step and gently places her hand over his gloved hand. Gazing into his startled eyes, she softly asks if he does not in truth cherish and love his son Arpad more than anyone else in the world. As the sovereign listens in stunned silence, she speaks with gentle certainty, telling him she knows more than anyone how desperately he wishes to save his son. Placing her hand over her chest, she passionately begs him for just one chance to prove she can save the crown prince. Her earnest appeal touches a deep chord, bringing a tragic memory flooding back as a dying voice calls out his name, Walter. He vividly recalls sitting at his beloved's deathbed, holding her hand as she desperately begged him to ensure their son would not suffer the same painful fate she did. Stepping into the quiet hallway outside the throne room, she exhales a heavy breath of relief as the grueling audience finally comes to an end. Persuading the monarch was her greatest hurdle, yet she successfully secured permission to hold their grand wedding banquet in Artanis Hall. Most meaningful of all was hearing the emperor formally acknowledge her as Arpad's wife for the very first time. Just as she allows herself to believe that fate is finally changing step by step, an urgent voice calling her name shatters the quiet corridor. Her blood runs cold as Ludwig rushes toward her, breathlessly claiming he was frantic with worry, and insisting they hurry back to their estate. Confronted by the monster from her past lives, utter horror locks her muscles, leaving her completely paralyzed and unable to retreat. The mere sight of his face unleashes a terrifying torrent of suppressed memories. Horrific visions of past tragedy, helpless suffering, and the triumphant smirk of the wicked woman who stole her husband flood her mind, smothering her voice before she can utter a single scream. Ludwig reaches out to drag her away toward his waiting carriage, but a powerful hand suddenly intervenes to break his grasp. Arpad steps forward protectively, wrapping a firm arm around her as he coldly orders Ludwig to address both him and his bride with proper respect. Crown Prince Arpad pulls Hylia close, declaring her as his bride and commanding Ludwig to show proper respect. Refusing to yield, Ludwig erupts in fury, asserting that Hylia belongs to him and warning that the emperor will punish Arpad for the crime of kidnapping his wife. Unfazed by the angry threat, Arpad mockingly questions where Ludwig sees a wife, instantly crushing his hand without hesitation. As Ludwig falls to his knees screaming in agony, the prince scoffs at his pathetic attempt to seek protection under the emperor's name. Cradling Hylia close to his chest, Arpad meets her gaze and calmly offers to break another one of Ludwig's legs. Shocked by the sudden proposal, Hylia desperately urges him to restrain himself, while her broken ex-husband grovels on the floor in terror. Ludwig loudly insists that His Majesty will never tolerate such violent lawlessness. Stepping over him, Arpad calmly reveals that the emperor has already authorized Artanis Hall for their wedding reception, offering to send him an invitation and leaving Ludwig utterly stunned. With Hylia held securely in his arms, Arpad walks away as Ludwig stammers in disbelief. However, a blonde woman suddenly rushes into the hall to block their path. Clutching her dress in distress, she turns to Arpad and asks if the shocking news of his marriage is really true. Staring at Evangeline's intense, desperate gaze, Hylia recognizes an expression she has never seen on her stepbrother's beloved before. It is not a look of affection meant for Ludwig, but a raw, yearning glance directed straight at the crown prince standing beside her. A disturbing truth suddenly dawns on Hylia as she rests against Arpad's shoulder. The ruthless woman who stole her husband and destroyed her past lives was never truly after Ludwig to begin with. Her true heart had been set on Arpad all along. Flashbacks of her previous regressions flood her mind, recalling how Evangeline once stood over her with cold arrogance, treating her stolen happiness like nothing more than a coveted toy. As tears slip down her cheek, Hylia mourns the senseless tragedy of her past lives. Snapping back to reality, Arfad coolly turns his attention toward Lady Luce. With unyielding composure, he informs her that His Majesty has already granted his full imperial blessing for their marriage and cleared Artanis Hall specifically for their grand wedding reception. Snuggling intimately into Arfad's embrace, Hylia flashes a sweet, mocking smile directly at her rival. She takes immense satisfaction in being the first to deliver the joyous news, watching Evangeline's composure shatter into absolute disbelief. Citing his bride's fatigue, Arfad firmly postpones any further audience with the crown princess. He turns away without a second thought, carrying Hylia securely in his arms as he walks out of the hall and leaves the stunned crowd behind. Left standing in complete humiliation, Evangeline tightly clenches the fabric of her dress in white-knuckled fury, watching helplessly as the grand prize she coveted is carried away by another woman. As they emerge beneath the towering spires of the Grand Imperial Palace, the tension finally begins to melt away. Gazing up at her protector, Hylia softly breaks the silence, asking Arfad if his arms have grown sore from carrying her all this time. Once inside their private chambers, Arfad dismisses Hylia's concern, reassuring her that carrying her all the way from the palace entrance was effortless. Relieved that he is unharmed, Hylia warmly expresses her gratitude for his decisive actions against Ludwig, admitting her ex-husband had been insufferable. As silence settles between them, Hylia quietly ponders whether Arfad is aware of Evangeline's true feelings. Recalling his indifferent demeanor in the hall, she wonders if he views her as nothing more than a stepsister, oblivious to the yearning glance her rival casts toward him. Crossing his arms with a stern gaze, Arfad shifts the conversation and demands answers of his own. He directly questions whether she truly received the divine blessing of Artanis, wondering if her grand promise in the catacombs to elevate him to emperor was entirely founded on that claim. Caught off guard, a flustered Hylia admits the divine blessing was merely a lie she fabricated on the spot to persuade the emperor and secure the wedding venue. Arfad dryly notes how naturally she lies, prompting Hylia to mentally warn herself to remain exceptionally cautious around him. Defending her deception, Hylia insists that her ability to prevent his madness is entirely genuine, reminding him that it was the sole reason he accepted her plunder marriage. Arfad acknowledges her point and agrees to discuss the matter later, though his attention begins to shift elsewhere. Closing the space between them without warning, Arfad leans down close to Hylia as she sits on the bed. Looking directly into her startled eyes, he brings his face near hers and demands to know the origin of the mysterious scent clinging to her. Fixing her with an unreadable, intense gaze, Arfad softly explains that he is familiar with nearly every fragrance across the entire empire. Yet her unique scent remains completely unknown and captivating to him. Leaning close to her face, Arfad fixes Hylia with an intense, unreadable gaze, softly admitting that her unfamiliar scent makes him feel strange. Closing the distance until their breath overlaps, he confesses a sudden desire to devour her. Towering over her on the bed, he leaves Hylia's heart pounding in panic as she fears his infamous madness is acting up. Struggling to keep her composure, Hylia stammers out a flustered response, desperately trying not to get swept away by his striking looks. She nervously asks if his condition includes a taste for human flesh, accusing him of having a rather peculiar appetite. When Arfad flatly rejects such a vulgar idea, Hylia lets out a sigh of relief. She jokingly warns him that rumors of cannibalism would ruin his reputation among his future subjects when he ascends the throne. Arfad's expression turns solemn as he muses whether public devotion from the empire's people is the only love he is meant to receive. Confused, Hylia suggests he could also earn the respect of neighboring nations through wise leadership, but Arfad cuts her off. Shifting closer, he gently points out that she has overlooked the most important affection of all, the love of the person closest to him. As Hylia falls back onto the bed in sheer astonishment, Arfad hovers over her with unyielding tenderness. Looking into her trembling eyes, he softly reminds her that while he is the crown prince, he is also her husband, and he cannot possibly manage without his genuine love. Leaning dangerously close, Arfad catches her off guard as he softly reminds her that beyond being the crown prince, he is also her husband. He asks if she will promise him her complete trust and affection. Flustered by his sudden intimacy, she stammers out a response, trying to maintain her composure by insisting they must look like the perfect couple everyone expects. Closing what little distance remains between their faces, Arfad's quiet tone turns serious as he demands absolute honesty from now on. He looks straight into her wide, startled eyes, asking directly whether her pledge to keep him from going mad truly has nothing to do with the blessing of Artemis, catching her completely unprepared for his sharp intuition. Catching onto his subtle strategy, she quickly realizes he was using his charm simply to pry into her hidden motives. Stealing her resolve, she flatly pushes him back and maintains that the two matters are completely unrelated, explaining that she only made up the claim to win the Emperor's recognition and secure permission to use Artanis Hall. When Arfad presses her on how she plans to present actual proof of the blessing to the Emperor, she coyly sidesteps the topic, declaring it a secret. He gazes down at her with mild skepticism, wondering if there is anything about her that isn't hidden, only for her to offer a playful wink and cheerfully confirm that everything remains secret. Arfad dryly remarks that a woman holding so many secrets isn't really his style, but she lightheartedly jokes that she will just have to make up for it in other ways. Beneath her bright banter lies the painful memory of her past lives and tragic deaths that she cannot reveal. Turning her words back on her, Arfad quietly contemplates what trust truly means in their arrangement. After Hylia leaves the audience chamber, the Emperor looks down from his throne and sharply questions Arfad, demanding to know if he truly believes that girl enough to risk committing the madness of a bride theft. Arfad gazes back with a cool intensity, admitting he isn't entirely sure himself, yet he cannot forget her unwavering resolve when she promised to keep him from succumbing to madness. Arfad explains to his visibly astonished father that despite the lack of evidence, he felt a conviction that keeping her by his side would prevent him from meeting his mother's tragic fate. The Emperor listens in stunned silence as Arfad stands unshakable, freely admitting that even knowing how reckless it was, he willingly went through with stealing his bride. A few days later, in the lush gardens of the Empress's palace, a group of noblewomen gather near the fountain, animatedly gossiping about Lady Delphin's swift move to secure Artanis Hall upon entering the palace. As they wonder aloud if the Emperor's heart simply favors his own son, one of the ladies turns to Baroness Edith Feliern, pressing her to share her thoughts on the matter. Baroness Edith raises a delicate hand to cover a polite laugh, offering a soft, non-committal reply to mask her sharp caution. Fully aware that the court is tensely divided between the Crown Prince and Grand Duke Ludwig, she knows an unwise step could spell her downfall, so she privately resolves to test the waters before changing how they refer to Lady Delphine. Their hushed discussion is interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps as Lady Luce arrives in the garden with her entourage. Smiling warmly at the gathered company, Luce graciously announces that she will host them today in her mother's stead, prompting the noble women to bow respectfully and shower her with polite praise for the honor of being received. When pressed by the surrounding noblewomen on what title they should officially use for Lady Delphine, Baroness Edith stammers in nervous hesitation, wondering aloud whether she ought to be addressed as Her Highness the Crown Princess, now that she has married Crown Prince Arfad. Luce abruptly interrupts with icy disapproval, sharply turning the Baroness's cautious inquiry into a disgraceful insult against Grand Duke Ludwig. She feigns tearful outrage, lamenting how dishonorably her brother's prospective bride was stolen away from him in front of the entire court. As Luce buries her face in her hands and pretends to weep, another noblewoman instantly leaps to her defense, harshly scolding the terrified Baroness for inflicting further pain on the Grand Duke. She reminds the gathered court ladies that the Emperor has only permitted the banquet, not officially sanctioned the marriage itself, tearfully hinting that the Empress holds nothing but disdain. For those who flatter power, Luce casts a cold, calculating glance at Edith, while the panicked Baroness frantically stammers that her innocent question was nothing more than a terrible misunderstanding. Paying no mind to her desperate excuses, palace attendants step forward to surround and escort the weeping Baroness from the garden, while she cries out in terror and begs in vain for an opportunity to explain herself directly to the Empress. Smoothly regaining her composure after the commotion, Luce graciously thanks the gathered ladies for their support and softly laments how deeply wounded her brother Ludwig remains, sharing with the sympathetic crowd that his heartbreak weighs most heavily on their mother's mind. Seizing the garden's hushed attention, Luce delivers a masterfully calculated announcement that leaves the noble women in stunned silence, revealing that because of her brother's unbearable grief, the Empress cannot bring herself to attend the upcoming banquet at Artanis Hall. Satisfied with her calculated performance, Luce revels in her authority, confident that no noblewoman in high society would dare attend a banquet where the empress is absent. Meanwhile, inside the crown prince's palace, Arfid sits at his desk while his aide delivers a thorough report on recent trade trends. Yet Arfid remains thoroughly distracted, irritated by how skillfully Hylia hides behind playful banter while keeping her endless secrets to herself. Tapping his fingers against the desk, Arfid finds himself deeply perplexed. Despite her insolent behavior and secret motives, he feels no urge to simply eliminate her to get her out of the way, leaving him quietly unsettled by his own unexpected restraint. Noticing his master's distant gaze, Arfid's aide, Ulkin, asks what is so strange, quickly realizes the prince hasn't heard a single word of his report. When Arfid dismissively refuses to explain and demands he start over, Ulkin sighs at his master's wanderings. Switching to what Arfid is most curious about, Ulkin reports that reliable informants have been placed around Lady Delphine to track her every move. Before he can continue, Arfid cuts in to admit the title bothers him, instructing Ulkin to call her the Crown Princess instead. Inside his grand office, Crown Prince Arfid makes his frustration clear, openly disliking any title that fails to honor Hylia as his true bride. His aide calmly points out that while their marriage has already been consummated, the emperor has not yet officially issued the royal decree appointing her as crown princess consort. Probing deeper into Arfid's true motives, the aide asks whether this daring plunder marriage was purely strategic or if he genuinely fell in love at first sight. When Arfid coolly asks what if he did, his thoroughly overwhelmed aide pulls out a pre-written letter of resignation, warning that his master's madness has relapsed. Before the aide can even step away, Arfad casually snaps his fingers, instantly summoning a spark of magic that burns the resignation letter to ash in midair. Watching his escape attempt disintegrate, the aide admits with a defeated sigh that his master knows his habits far too well. Shifting their conversation back to pressing political matters, the aide asks how Hylia managed to claim Artanis Hall directly from the emperor. Arfad admits even he was astonished when she cast a silence barrier to whisper private terms, securing the grand estate so effortlessly that it almost seemed like dark magic. Adjusting his glasses, the aide suggests observing Hylia's actions carefully while serving her, proposing to address her as the mistress of the ivory chamber until her true standing is confirmed. Intrigued by his aide's cautious compromise, Arfad softly tells him to proceed as he sees fit. Meanwhile, in a quietly lit drawing room, Lady Philern breaks down into helpless tears, covering her face in deep distress. Her companion gently tries to calm her, but Philern cries out that her intentions were completely misunderstood, leaving her lost and unsure of how to rectify the growing rift. As Lady Philern breaks down into desperate tears in the quiet drawing room, Hylia softly reassures her that Her Majesty the Empress will soon calm down. Clasping her hands in overwhelming relief, the distraught noblewoman tearfully thanks her for arranging their meeting and offering comfort in her darkest hour. Behind her compassionate posture, Hylia's gaze turns cold as memories of her past life resurface. Back then, a terrified Baroness Philern had similarly wept after falling out of favor with Evangeline, leading a naive Hylia to offer her genuine sympathy and warm friendship. That kindness was met with complete deception. Philern was secretly Evangeline's spy, and her public falling out had been nothing more than a staged performance. Once she wormed her way into Hylia's confidence, she reported her every move and framed her for crimes she never committed. Masking her true intent behind a gracious smile, Hylia warmly clasps Philern's hands and offers her friendship once more. While Philern rejoices in tearful gratitude, Hylia's purple eyes flash with calculated malice, determined to return every past betrayal and keep her enemy close as target bait. Later, inside the grand setting of the ivory chamber, Crown Prince Arfid quietly closes his book. Turning with composure, he adjusts his glasses and teasingly inquires if she sought him out after hearing rumors that her taste favors an intellectual man who looks good in glasses. Rushing over after receiving his urgent summons, Hylia finds Arfad lounging elegantly while posing in glasses. She playfully questions his dramatic setup, pointing out that someone blessed with dragon blood hardly needs vision correction. Teasing him for using his handsome looks, her attention turns to the black tome in his hands, the founding history of the empire, before Arfad warmly invites her to read a passage he holds dear. Accepting the heavy volume, Hylia reads aloud the romantic legend of the empire's dragon progenitor. The text describes how the legendary creature recognized his true bride at first glance, calling her the soul flower capable of making his soul complete. Driven by an irresistible instinct, the dragon could not resist claiming her. Closing the book with a quiet snap, Hylia chuckles and remarks on his unexpectedly romantic nature, attributing such sentimentality to his dragon lineage. But mid-sentence, her words trail off into silence. Looking up, she freezes beneath his unblinking gaze as his red eyes lock onto hers from behind his glasses, leaving her wondering how long he has been watching her so intensely. Softening his tone, Arfid admits that this story held a special place in his heart ever since he was young. Surprised by his admission, Hylia asks why a child would favor a romantic passage over grand imperial battles. He calmly reveals that he always wished for someone who could make him whole, believing that such a person might grant him the power to conquer his inherent madness. Looking toward her, Arfad wonders aloud if he would be able to recognize such a destined partner at a glance, just as Artanis did, contemplating how lovely that person would be. Hylia stands frozen before him in stunned silence, her eyes wide as the true depth of his vulnerability sinks in. Arfid softly confesses that he once feared he might grow to resent his destined bride for making him endure such long isolation, yet now he feels he may have already met her. Hearing his quiet confession, Hylia completely freezes in place as a sudden wave of shock takes hold. Looking up into his intense, unblinking gaze, she nervously wonders if he has already seen right through her guarded motives. Could he truly suspect that she is the legend's actual bride, the only person gifted with the power to soothe the dragon's madness? In ancient lore, dragons kidnapping princesses were no mere fairy tale, but a recurring part of actual history driven by two distinct motives. Whether a dragon sought to claim a beautiful royal as his or devour her completely, both acts stemmed from the same single truth, the existence of the dragon's bride. A dragon's bride was a legendary being capable of dramatically enhancing a dragon's body and latent power, as if she were a vital piece of the creature returned. Consequently, dragons pursued their brides in vastly different ways, some treasuring them as lifelong companions while others devoured them for pure strength. Driven by this relentless desire, the dragon Artanis waged a fierce multi-issues against an entire nation without ever giving up on Princess Estrid. Risking an entire kingdom proved just how indispensable she was to him, all because she carried the profound weight of being the dragon's bride. She had uncovered this horrifying truth during her painful third life, after being falsely accused of treason and thrown onto death row. Reduced to a mere test subject before her scheduled execution, she found herself trapped alongside Arpad, who had been exiled through Ludwig's relentless schemes. High within the ominous walls of the magic tower, the Tower Lord was consumed by a single goal: learning how to manipulate and control Arpad's extreme madness. To achieve this, he conducted relentless experiments by chaining innocent captives beside Arpad, cruelly using her as one of his helpless subjects. After crossing the threshold of death dozens of times, her spirit finally broke under the horrific strain. Yet just as madness claimed her, Gaspal, the Lord of the Magic Tower, triumphantly declared his discovery, that Arpad specifically refrained from harming her because she possessed a unique constitution. Inside the dark cell, Gaspal revealed that Arpad refrained from attacking her simply because she possessed the unique constitution he required. Even though the Crown Prince had already devolved into a terrifying monster, discovering that he deliberately spared her life changed how she viewed him entirely. As an incomplete dragon half-blood, instinct should have driven Arpad to devour her flesh and blood to claim ultimate power. Yet he resisted that savage urge until her final moments, leading the Tower Lord to sinisterly declare her as the legendary dragon's bride. Although that painful third life ended on the execution scaffold 6 months later, remembering Arpad's restraint gave her crucial insight for her fourth life. She approached him intentionally, planning to use her unique existence as powerful leverage to secure a plunder marriage. She recognized that being so valuable to a half-dragon made her deeply vulnerable, which was why she resolved never to utter the words dragon's bride first. But now, standing before Arpad in the quiet room while he observed her, tension quietly stretched between them. Trying to break the uneasy quiet, she hesitantly addressed him as Mr. Arpad Estrid instead of his royal title. When he asked why she dropped the formal greeting, she quickly put on a bright smile, claiming she was just relieved his madness was kept at bay. Yet Arpad met her cheerful excuse with an unreadable silence, His sharp red eyes stared her intently from behind dark-rimmed glasses, hiding whatever thoughts were racing through his mind. Arpad catches her off guard by asking how she would feel if the person she had desperately waited for suddenly appeared, whether she would love them or hate them for the long years of suffering. Feigning innocence with a bright, cheerful smile, she turns the question back onto him, stating that the choice to love or hate belongs solely to His Highness. Arpad points out how neatly she avoided an answer and insists on knowing her thoughts, while she secretly finds comfort in knowing he still does not suspect her true identity as the dragon's bride. His unexpected confession leaves her startled. Arpad firmly declares he would hate them, because having his feelings manipulated by fate would mean losing control over his own heart. Hiding her inner relief, she laughingly replies that since she isn't that fate-bound person, he has no reason to resent her, earning a silent, intense stare before he quietly concurs. The following morning dawns over the sunlit palace spires, where morning preparations get underway as delicate makeup brushes soft powder across her cheek. After an exhausting, sleepless night beneath Arpad's unyielding gaze, Estrid sits with vanity while her maids misinterpret her fatigue as evidence of intimacy, offering her a fleeting moment of relief to focus on her next move. Seeking urgent news of her inner circle, she questions the head maid Essia about the Delphine estate, relieved to hear that Annie remains untouched amidst the chaos consuming the household. However, the revelation that Archduke Ludwig has thrown Sir Belton into the dungeon strikes her with sudden alarm, compelling her to immediately order a rescue team to bring her loyal knight and maid to safety. When Essia dares to challenge her authority by asking if the crown prince approved the move, Estrid turns on her, demanding to know where the maid's true allegiance lies. Exposing Essia as Arpad's informant, she dismisses the maid on the spot, firmly declaring that she needs no royal permission to handle matters concerning her own household. Entrusting the mission to her other attendants, Estrid prepares for the dangerous road ahead. With the vital Artanis Hall banquet approaching in a month, she is determined to thwart the Empress and Evangeline's plot to ostracize her and claim her legitimate place as Crown Princess. To reclaim her rightful position as Crown Princess, Estrid knows she must gather her loyal allies quickly, fully determined to crush both the Empress and Evangeline at the upcoming banquet. Inside the Crown Prince's sunlit reception room, Hylia feigns vulnerability before Viscountess Philern, lamenting her lack of close friends and allies for the upcoming wedding banquet. Grasping Hylia's hands with false sympathy, Philern eagerly offers to distribute the invitations herself. Hylia warmly calls her a true friend, while secretly exploiting Philern's hidden malice. Philern inwardly gloats, convinced that inviting modest nobles to prestigious Artanis Hall will ruin the banquet's elite standing and subject Hylia to public mockery. However, Hylia remains steps ahead, imploring Philern to spread the invitations far and wide while quietly counting on her to report every detail back to Evangeline. Noticing the ornate Crown Princess's seal on the invitation, Philern curiously asks if the Emperor has granted permission for its official use. Hylia blushes demurely and lowers her head, softly explaining that although it is not yet officially recognized, Crown Prince Arfid brought the seal to her himself and insisted she use it. Leaning closer, Hylia whispers a few carefully chosen ideas for the banquet, watching as Philern enthusiastically agrees to carry out her request. Later that night, high within the Delphine Duke's residence, Philern reports every detail of their encounter inside Evangeline's private room. Examining the sealed invitation, Evangeline breaks into a gloating smile upon seeing the unauthorized Crown Princess's seal. When Philern mentions that Arfad permitted its use, Evangeline slams her hand down in fury, reminding her that only the Emperor possesses the power to grant royal seals, and declaring Hylia utterly foolish for breaking protocol. Evangeline listens intently as Philern explains Hylia's panic over the banquet hall remaining empty a month from now. Philern reveals that Hylia plans to spread desperate rumors that the Emperor himself might attend, attempting to force noble attendance before their ruined prestige strips away her title as Crown Princess. Adjusting her dress with cool confidence, Evangeline takes pleasure in Hylia's apparent anxiety. She remains convinced that no noble lady will dare step foot into Artanis Hall, oblivious to the fact that Hylia is orchestrating every move to lure her enemies into a trap. Inside her grand room, Evangeline viciously tears the wedding invitation to pieces, reveling in the certainty that Hylia's upcoming banquet will crumble into public humiliation. She savors every second of Helia's apparent despair, convinced that her rival will be left with nothing but empty halls, ruined prestige, and a stripped title. Across the capital, whispers spread like wildfire through high society's glittering ballrooms. Noblewomen gather behind painted fans, mockingly discussing Hylia's desperate attempt to lure guests with baseless rumors of the emperor's presence. To the elite, her frantic moves only confirm that Artemis Hall is destined to stand entirely empty. Inside the prince's reception room, Viscountess Philern delivers what should be devastating news. Marquise Quinabel, one of the Empress's closest companions, has suddenly scheduled a competing ball on the exact same night in the imperial palace. Hylia gasps, bringing her gloved hands to her face in utter dismay while stammering that her banquet will be completely ruined. Seeing her opponent so visibly shaken, Philern eagerly clasps Hylia's hands, promising to personally distribute the invitations while secretly rejoicing at her rival's downfall. As Philern struts away down the palace grounds with a victorious grin, Helia stands high above at the window, watching her depart. The moment she is out of sight, Helia's posture shifts and her timid mask vanishes completely. A cold, calculating smile touches her lips as she realizes that Evangel has taken the bait, unwittingly setting an even grander stage for her ultimate trap. Later, in the quiet solitude of her private quarters, Helia turns sternly to her servants upon learning that Annie and Beltine have not arrived. The maids immediately drop to their knees in terror, bowing low as they apologize for failing her command. Unfazed by their panic, Helia's gaze darkens with quiet resolution. She immediately sees through the disruption, knowing Ludwig is still lording over the Delphine residence to block her loyal followers and keep her isolated. With the palace servants finally brought under control, Helia turns her full attention to the main threat. She realizes that allowing an outsider like Ludwig to dictate terms at the Delphine residence undermines her standing as sole heir. Recognizing that failing to manage her own estate will draw fierce public criticism regarding her capability as crown princess, she freshens up and changes her attire, determined to inform Arfad before taking matters into her own hands. Meanwhile, inside the crown prince's dimly lit office, Arfad pauses his work as his aide asks whether he truly plans to leave Helia's bold moves unchecked. The aide voices deep concern, questioning how they can trust someone who is actively driving out the prince's staff and rebelling against their authority. Rather than expressing doubt, Arfad smirks with quiet amusement, confessing that her decisive actions actually increase his trust in her. He firmly notes that a leader who cannot discern whom to keep or dismiss is unworthy of high office, praising her unyielding resolve. A soft knock breaks their discussion, and Hylia enters the study wearing a vibrant new dress and a cheerful smile. Watching her greet the prince, the aide smugly assumes she has come to beg Arfad to fix her household troubles, fully expecting her to be scolded and dismissed on the spot. Instead of begging for help, Hylia casually informs Arfad that he will have to sleep alone tonight. Taken completely by surprise, the crown prince asks what is going on, and Hylia demurely explains that she is returning to the Delphine residence to personally restore order to her household. Leaving the aide wide-eyed in total shock, Helia pauses near Arfad's desk and announces that she almost forgot something important. Leaning down, she places a soft kiss on Arfad's cheek and wishes him a good night, leaving the crown prince frozen in silent amazement as she walks out of the room. With a sly hand-over-mouth smile, Helia offers a final teasing question to Arfad before cheerfully announcing her departure. She lightly glides out of the sunlit study, leaving the crown prince momentarily stunned. Behind her, Arfad's aide drops into comical panic, his mind reeling over such casual affection. He nervously wonders if the rumors are true, that the crown prince fell at first sight and swept her away in a whirlwind plunder marriage. Before the aide can even catch his breath, Arfad abruptly rises from and reaches for his dark red coat. When asked where he is heading, the prince coldly retorts, demanding if he must report his every movement before striding straight out to follow her. Later that evening, an imperial carriage comes to a stop beneath grand Gothic arches. Stepping out in a pristine white dress and lace bonnet, Helia offers a graceful greeting, thanking her contact for accepting such a sudden meeting. Emerging from the shadows is her secret ally, the masked and fur-clad mercenary King Gerald. Greeting the crown prince in his magic disguise as Gerald the mercenary king, she lightly teases him about hiding his true appearance behind a dark, enchanted mask. When she mentions feeling a bit disappointed by his guarded look, she maintains a composed smile, reminding him that true disappointment can only follow high expectations. Leaning in closer toward him in the quiet carriage, she directly asks if he was displeased that she sought assistance with her family's internal affairs instead of resolving them on her own. He quietly admits his doubts, having observed her closely to test whether she was genuinely worthy of the heavy price he paid for their alliance. Refusing to let him harbor any misunderstandings, she looks at him with an unflinching gaze and reaches out, resting her hand lightly against his chest. She assures Prince Arpad that there is no need for such disappointment, drawing a clear line by stating that she never actually asked the Crown Prince for his royal help. Looking directly into the eyes of Gerald, she emphasizes that the man sitting before her right now is strictly the mercenary king. When he accuses her of playing clever games with words, she counters firmly, reminding him that securing proper justification is the most critical battle of all in high-stakes political maneuvering. Noticing his quiet shift in posture, she points out that Gerald and the Black mercenaries have been far too inactive lately, leaving them without results for a long period. She proposes solving their respective problems together, ensuring that the name of the missing mercenary king will once again spread far and wide. Holding his coat tightly, she lays out the brilliant strategy behind her request. By hiring his mercenaries to handle her family's power struggle, a massive uproar will erupt across the capital by tomorrow, allowing Crown Prince Arpad to achieve the downfall of his political rivals, without having to lift a finger himself. Hylia softly reminds Gerald that accepting her contract will carve his name into legend as the mercenary king who forced even the imperial family to bow. Holding his gaze with absolute confidence, she leaves the decision entirely in his hands. Meanwhile, back inside the Grand Duke's residence, a chaotic scene breaks out as the disgraced husband staggers drunkenly across the room. Overcome by paranoia, he shoves his attendant away and grabs the old butler by his collar, wildly screaming that even his own servants are looking down on him after his wife was taken. When the angry nobleman finally collapses onto the sofa in a stupor, the breathless butler adjusts his collar with bitterness. He had deliberately disobeyed Lady Hylia's instructions just to follow his master's orders, only to be rewarded with senseless rage and humiliation. The butler silently recalls Lady Evangeline's stern warning during their recent meeting. Watching him coldly, Evangeline had dismissed Hylia's chances of ever becoming crown princess, declaring that neither she nor the empress would ever extend mercy or forgiveness to anyone who turned their back on them. Tucking the unconscious Grand Duke into bed, the butler knows he cannot switch allegiances even if he wanted to. Evangeline's faction had shielded his own corrupt actions in the mansion following the tragic deaths of the former duke and butler, binding him forever to their side. Suddenly, a panicked maid rushes into the room, her voice trembling in fear. Before the startled butler can berate her for making such a disturbance, she blurts out the terrifying news that Lady Hylia has unexpectedly arrived at the estate grounds. Pullman, the butler, gasps in utter shock as Lady Hylia unexpectedly strides into the Grand Duke's estate, accompanied by Gerald and a menacing force of dark mercenaries. Hurrying down the grand entrance hall, the old servant nervously stammers out a greeting, informing her that the Grand Duke is currently resting in his bedchamber. Glaring down at him with cold contempt, Hylia sharply questions why he assumes she came looking for her disgraced husband. Completely oblivious to the danger around him, Pullman audaciously asks if she has returned to offer an apology, leaving her stunned by his unbelievable nerve. The butler smugly preaches that she must consider the Grand Duke's wounded pride, claiming there is no greater insult for a man than having his bride snatched away. He insists his master deserves sympathy for drowning his embarrassment in alcohol, completely unaware of Hylia's mounting fury. With her eyes blazing with crimson rage, Hylia refuses to endure another second of his hypocritical lectures. Raising her hand with terrifying composure, she issues a ruthless command to the mercenaries behind her, ordering them to instantly force the insolent old man straight to his knees. The mercenaries slam Pullman hard against the marble floor with a crushing blow. Stepping forward until her shoe rests right beside his bowed head, Hylia coldly informs him that every single word he spoke was wrong, ready to completely dismantle his false assumptions. With overwhelming authority glowing in her gaze, she makes her grand declaration, announcing that she is no longer a mere noble daughter, but the reigning crown princess of the entire empire. Her formidable words leave the pinned butler cowering in absolute terror. Ignoring Pullman's panicked excuses that he was only worried for the Grand Duke, Hylia coldly orders the guards to haul him away into confinement. Turning to her allies, she commands the mercenaries outside to sweep through the mansion and completely suppress the entire estate. As the dark mercenaries sweep through the grand hall, desperate servants frantically turn on one another, attempting to shift the blame to save themselves. Realizing that the entire household has been corrupted by her enemies, Hylia cold-heartedly commands her guards to lock away every single traitor. Amidst the turmoil, a loyal maid named Annie rushes to Hylia's side, relieved to see her return safely. Hylia gently tries to set aside formality with her trusted servant, but Annie bows low, determined to grant her mistress the royal respect she now commands. Annie's tone suddenly turns solemn as she delivers harrowing news from the depths of the estate. Sir Beltane has been imprisoned in the dark basement and subjected to horrific abuse by the Grand Duke. A sudden shock strikes Hylia, and her hand clenches into a tight, trembling fist. Her eyes burning with cold resolve, Hylia commands Annie to lead her directly to the basement without delay. Locked away in the shadows, Sir Beltane sits heavily bruised and bound in iron chains, enduring his confinement until his lady arrives. Deep beneath the estate, stone steps lead into a cold dungeon cell where Sir Beltane hangs in heavy chains. Hylia rushes to his side in distress, but despite his severe wounds and blood-soaked clothes, the loyal knight gives a sigh of deep relief just seeing her alive and unharmed. Arfad steps into the dimly lit cell, visibly shaken after realizing the knight's condition is far worse than anticipated. When Beltane tries to move through the agonizing pain, Hylia frantically tells him to stop before he collapses completely. Recognizing that his life is hanging by a thread, Hylia insists on summoning a doctor immediately. Under swift command, the wounded knight is readied to be taken to a physician before it becomes too late. Leaving the gloomy dungeon behind, footsteps echo along the stone passage as Arfad quietly walks behind her. He breaks the heavy silence by softly calling her name, asking if she is holding up all right after the shock. Hylia stops dead in her tracks and turns on him with a sharp, piercing glare. Confronting Arfad face to face, she directly demands to know why he concealed the horrific truth of Sir Beltane's state from her all along. Arfad defends hiding the truth, insisting he gave exact information that the knight was alive. Hylia furiously retorts that she paid for a full report on his condition, but Arfad leans in close, asking if demanding her new husband look after her lover isn't a bit much. Hylia firmly rejects his accusation, warning him that slandering Beltane's honor goes far too far. Yet Arfad remains entirely unconvinced, pointing out how desperately she ran to the knight's side the moment she saw him bound in chains inside the cell. Refusing to debate his jealousy any longer, Hylia cold shoulders him completely. She warns Arfad that if any harm comes to Beltane over his petty misunderstandings, she will never forgive him, before turning on her heel and marching briskly up the stone steps. Stepping back into the grand estate hall, they are greeted by pure chaos as panicked retainers rush to inform the disheveled Grand Duke of her return. Watching the pathetic servants tattle to her former husband, Hylia can only look on with utter disdain at their frantic scramble. Dazed and visibly intoxicated, the Grand Duke stares at Hylia in bewildered awe, asking if she was always this breathtaking. But when her maid angrily snaps at his senseless drunken babble, he indignantly insists that this grand estate is still his home. Hylia cuts him down without a shred of pity, declaring that the house is hers alone and he has no right to stay. She coldly reminds him of her new plunder marriage to the crown prince, severing every last tie between them for good. As the former husband stands frozen in utter disbelief, Arfad steps up beside Hylia with dark satisfaction, mocking him by pointing out that the woman he threw away is officially his sister-in-law now. Unable to accept reality, the Grand Duke snaps, his face twisting in rage. He lunges straight toward Hylia, frantically screaming that she will always belong to him. But before he can even lay a hand on her, Arfad moves like a shadow, charging forward instantly to block his path. Grabbing the former husband by his high collar with terrifying force, the crown prince lifts him nearly off his feet. Trapped in a tight grip, the disheveled duke struggles frantically, choking out panic demands to be released. A dark, lethal aura settles around Arfad as his crimson gaze burns beneath his mask. Furious at hearing this pathetic man lay claim to Hylia, he contemplates ending him on the spot, longing to cut out the tongue that dares claim what is now his. Before blood can be spilled in the hall, Hylia intervenes with icy authority. She softly commands Arfad to leave Ludwig alone and deal with the screaming retainers instead. Though the servants shout in protest, Arfad submits to her order without hesitation. In a swift, terrifying display of power, the retainers are mercilessly knocked down, crying out for mercy as they collapse. Standing amid the carnage, Arfad takes a quiet breath, marveling at how effortlessly Hylia drives him to lose his usual cold composure. Overwhelmed by sheer terror, embarrassment, and the sudden display of force, the Grand Duke's eyes roll back. He swoons and falls heavily onto the Grand Hall floor, completely unconscious. Gazing down at her former husband's helpless figure without a shred of sympathy, Hylia turns away with utter disdain. She nonchalantly orders her staff to prepare a carriage immediately, eager to have her uninvited guest loaded up and banished from her estate forever. Hylia coolly commands her guards to see that her unconscious guest is escorted off the property immediately. Hearing her heartless order, a loyal retainer drops to his knees beside the fallen duke in utter horror, loudly protesting how she could treat the Grand Duke so cruelly after everything he did for her. Stepping forward with quiet authority, Hylia reminds him that she has already been wed to the crown prince before the gods, permanently severing every connection to Ludwig. She firmly asks how anyone can justify her ex-husband drinking in her home and acting like master, calling the entire scene a complete outrage. As the trembling retainer stares up in speechless shock, Hylia turns to Gerald to inquire how the crime of insulting royalty is punished under imperial law. The masked aide bows respectfully, declaring that anyone who dares mock a noble member of the imperial family shall have that offending part of their body severed. A wave of pure terror washes over the estate maid, who gasps in horror as the brutal reality of imperial law sinks in. Unmoved by their panic, Hylia calmly turns on her heel and orders Gerald to haul the offender out, noting that her grand hall is hardly a suitable place to draw blood. Desperate to save himself, the sobbing retainer scrambles across the floor, frantically begging for mercy. But at Hylia's swift command to restrain him, Gerald steps in and pins the man down, clamping a crushing grip around his throat to instantly choke back his pathetic shrieks. Gazing down with icy indifference, Hylia coldly tells the helpless servant to keep screaming while he still has the chance. Her magenta eyes burn with a dark, terrifying resolve, warning him that those desperate pleas will be the absolute last words his tongue ever speaks. Screams of terror shatter the quiet night as a bloody, trembling captive desperately begs for mercy, pleading not to have his tongue cut off. Standing over him with chilling composure, the young lady calmly reassures him that she has no need for such crude violence to guarantee his silence. Raising the glowing ancestral artifact of House Delphine, she channels its magic to place a dark curse upon his speech. The spell guarantees that his tongue will be instantly severed the moment he speaks a single word about what happened here, leaving the terrified man screaming in overwhelming agony. Leaving the bloody traitor restrained on the floor, she strides authoritatively into the grand hall alongside the imposing, masked crown prince, standing together as an indomitable pair. Their cold, united presence immediately radiates absolute authority, leaving the surrounding onlookers completely paralyzed with fear. She casually directs her staff to take the bleeding man to a physician, remarking that his death would only prove troublesome. Turning her gaze toward the room full of trembling servants, she challenges them directly, asking if anyone present still harbors the desire to insult her or disobey her commands. While the room remains frozen in silence, she carefully calculates her next strategic move. Realizing that rumors of tonight's dramatic event will inevitably reach high society, she understands that acting swiftly and ruthlessly will raise her standing while enabling her to thoroughly eliminate every trace of Ludwig and Evangeline's faction. Looking down at the deeply bowing staff, she orders anyone who assisted the Grand Duke in framing House Delphine to hand over written statements detailing names and full facts. She makes a firm promise that only those who step forward with valuable information will have any hope of receiving leniency. Her eyes glitter with fierce resolve as she contemplates the decisive battle ahead. If she is to risk taking action personally during such a vital turning point, every move must yield significant results, and she is set on completing the total purge of the ducal house before sunrise. A few hours later, inside the quiet Delphine family office, a mountain of written confessions rests upon the ornate desk. Exhausted and bracing herself for harsh judgment, she bitterly invites the crown prince to laugh at her complete failure to control her own household. But as Arfad slowly unmasks, revealing his handsome face framed by soft light, his red eyes remain remarkably gentle as he softly asks why he would ever laugh at her. Tapping her slender hand against the pile of written confessions, she lays bare the rampant corruption within her estate, explaining that the situation had grown so chaotic that anyone would have embezzled the family assets. She assumes that exposing such deep administrative vulnerability before a royal ally naturally invites scorn. Yet, she resolutely refuses to conceal the grim reality of her situation. Looking directly into her eyes with quiet respect, Arfid earnestly promises that he will never mock her struggle. Caught entirely off guard by his sincere warmth, her eyes widen in sudden surprise before she quickly recovers her composure. Setting firm boundaries, she warns him that while she gave him leeway tonight, she will never tolerate mockery from anyone regarding this matter. Leaning close across the candlelight-dappled desk, Arfad fixes his intense gaze upon her and shifts the conversation to pressing business. He asks her directly about the glowing ancestral artifact she wielded earlier against Ludwig's traitorous attendant, openly questioning if an ancient relic could truly possess the complex magic required to execute such a precise and horrifying curse in their confrontation. Recalling the trembling servant who shattered in sheer terror under the artifact's oppressive and distorted magic, Arfad remains deeply intrigued by what transpired in the hall. Standing authoritatively over her desk, he candidly asks whether casting a curse designed to instantly sever someone's tongue upon speaking a single word is genuinely possible in practice, or if it was a radiant, mischievous smile breaks across her face as she joyfully confesses that the terrifying curse was nothing more than a bright red lie. Clapping her hands together with playful delight, she reveals that the intimidating Delphine artifact is actually just a harmless magical toy that does nothing more than light up in vibrant colors and flap its tiny wings when activated. Calling her a completely unpredictable woman, Arfad watches intently as she carefully cradles the glowing relic in her hands. Softening her expression, she gently reveals that the harmless magical bird was actually the final keepsake left by her late mother. She hesitates, quietly asking if he feels disappointed that she lowered herself to using such a sacred maternal memory to execute a ruthless threat. Shaking his head, Arfad earnestly assures her that he was thoroughly impressed by her sheer brilliant resourcefulness. He playfully compares her cunning trick to the moment she boldly pulled off a daring con right before the emperor while wearing his own mother's borrowed relic. Caught completely off guard by his praise, she lets out a soft sigh as the memory washes over her. Leaning in with a strikingly warm smile, Arfid tenderly reassures her that her mother would actually be immensely pleased. He insists that it does not matter how the relic was used, so long as it served to shield her and secure her advantage, proving that her mother's lingering love continues to protect her. Clasping the soft, glowing relic tightly against her chest, she gazes down in quiet contemplation. Though her mother has long passed and her true wishes remain unspoken, Arfed's unexpected sincerity washes over her spirit like a soothing balm, offering a profound sense of comfort that touches her heart deeply. Pausing near the doorway of the quiet office, Arfad turns back to deliver one final, decisive declaration. He vows to thoroughly ruin Ludwig once and for all, dryly claiming that since she forced him into this blackmail marriage, he would feel terribly wronged if he didn't personally crush her former husband to pieces. The following morning, Ludwig groggily stirs awake inside his private bedchamber, clutching his throbbing head in complete disorientation. When a timid attendant informs him that he has been brought back to the Grand Duke's residence, Ludwig struggles to piece together how his night at the Delphine estate ended so abruptly before heavy footsteps echo through the room. Without warning, a sharp slap crackles across the quiet room as a furious Evangeline strikes him hard across the face. Staggering backward in sheer shock while clutching his burning, reddened cheek, Ludwig stammers out her name in absolute horror, utterly defenseless against her sudden, unbridled rage. Her eyes burning with dark fury, Evangeline looms over the reeling Ludwig in absolute rage. Demanding answers without a single shred of mercy, she asks him sharply if he even comprehends the full weight of what he has done.